We will reconvene our meeting from this morning, State Board of Higher Education for February 3rd. Christy, would you call the roll?
Board Chair Nesset.
Here.
Mr. Morton.
Here.
Dr. Melliker.
Here.
Mr. Steeman.
Here.
Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Ness.
Here.
Mr. Hacker.
Here.
Ms. Tufte.
Here.
Dr. Murphy. Ms. Reichert.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to take a moment and thank NDSU and Dr. Brashani for hosting us today, last evening. We appreciate it very much. You're a gracious host. I'd also like to just take a moment and in words to the board, I just want to tell you, as we continue to work through this process of what I still consider a very young and new board coming together, and me and Dawn new in our positions here, how much I enjoy it and how effective I think we have been and how cohesive I believe our board is. I have all the confidence in the world that we have an excellent communication set up here. I appreciate the input that I receive from board members. I hope that you feel that you can contact me. I know you can contact Dawn at any time as well. Our Chancellor, yes, you can call Dawn the late night ones. You know, I just want to review once again, though, the hierarchy of our system. We are a governing and a policy board, and that is our role here, along with our CEO, who is our Chancellor, Dr. Hagerut, and then we have our cabinet structure with all our presidents working together, and that is something that I like to reinforce and remember. That is our setup. And I think it's very effective, and I think it works very well. I like having the input from our cabinet. I value it very much. I really appreciate the work of this board, though, and all the time that everybody puts into it. With that, I'd like to go ahead and move ahead to approval of the agenda. And prior to approving it, I personally would like to make one addition to the agenda at the very beginning here. I would like to add to the agenda Dr. Scogan, President Scogan from Bismarck State, to do a short briefing for us on the security issue that Bismarck State dealt with in the past month. 14th of January, and along with him, Senator Flackhall will join Dr. Scogan and bring to light some draft ideas on campus security issues. So I would like to make that as a amended agenda, and I'd also ask if there are any other changes to the agenda. Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion to approve the amended agenda. Thank you. Second?
Second. Second.
Thank you. Christy?
Dr. Melliker.
Yes.
Mr. Hacker.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Morton.
Yes.
Mr. Steeman.
Yes.
Ms. Reichert. Mr. Ness.
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset.
Yes. And with that, I will begin with Dr. Scogan. Would you like to come up at this point? And I'll leave it to the two of you. Perhaps you can give us a briefing on your security event, and then we'll follow that up with Senator Flackhall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll do this briefly. I think I'll divide this into three parts quickly: what happened, and then some of our lessons learned, and then just recently we received a briefing from the FBI, which will tell you how they knew that we had a threat against us. But that information didn't come to light to me but within the last few days of actually getting an FBI briefing. So what happened? About 11 o'clock on January 14th, our police department was notified that by the FBI from Minot that there was a credible threat against our campus, that someone had posted on Twitter that they were going to shoot up a library at a school, and that the tweet from a telephone posted to the Twitter, and that telephone was on our campus. Because they can ping these things. They can follow you. One of the legislators said we can follow you on your GPS. Well, they knew that the telephone that issued the threat was on our campus. So we immediately brought together then our crisis management team. We had a quick discussion about the fact that we now had this credible threat against us and what do we do, and very quickly decided to lock down the campus. And so for the first time ever, we got on the PA system, immediately locked down the campus, sent out using Assurance, which is the new notifying. We sent out the texts right away. We sent out emails right away, and the campus locked down. Our police department was in contact with Bismarck PD. They responded. What I didn't know until after the fact, we had a number of police agencies that responded. Bismarck PD, Burley County Sheriff, the CBI from the state, the FBI, even the Department of Corrections, probation and parole officers, because a campus is big, and they needed that many officers, so, and the Highway Patrol as well. So we had dozens and dozens of uniformed police on our campus. Well, no way to anticipate, of course, is it ended up for 4.5 hours. We were in contact. They set up an incident command post in our library, and we were in contact with the commander there. And what they knew through the whole thing is that they had a credible threat against us. They had a picture of gun with the tweet, that the telephone that it came from was still on our campus. And the piece they didn't know is whether or not the individual was actually armed and whether or not this person could carry out the threat. So what they did is then started a building by building search, going room by room and clearing each room and each building as they went in. Eventually, as the investigation went on, they knew the name of the individual they were looking for. And so they were checking IDs of students, and they were, I mean, it was quite an ordeal for all the students and for all the employees. At the end of the day, then they ended up, when they lifted the lockdown, is that they actually arrested then the individual with that telephone, making the assumption, of course, that the Twitter came from that individual. It turns out it was a juvenile, 16-year-old boy that was actually on a campus tour at Bismarck State College. And they ended up, and not to get into too many boring details, but the investigation was moving so rapidly that they thought, who they thought they were looking for the first time was not the one they were looking for the second time, and not the one they were looking for the third time, was actually the fourth person. Well, by that time, that individual had gotten on a school bus because they had been cleared, and they were on their way north of Bismarck. And so the Highway Patrol then, they were tracking the phone, they stopped the school bus, and they made an arrest. So that's what, those are the events, 4.5 hours. By the time the last building was cleared. Some of our lessons learned in that, excuse me, some of our lessons learned in that is that we felt really good about our communications. We were sending out updates every 10 minutes. Both by text message and by email message. And of course now, you know, students have their cell phones with them, faculty have their cell phones with them, and so they were getting those messages, and we thought that was really important because they're locked down in rooms, and again, it turned out to be 4.5 hours. It's a very, very long time. One of the things I think the most valuable thing for us, and I would certainly encourage my colleagues on this, is that we had been doing tabletop exercises where we brought the emergency management team together and said, what if? Well, as it turned out, when we walked into the conference room and knew that we had a credible threat, it wasn't like the first time we sat around talking about this stuff. And that was really helpful. And we'd also had our policemen had been going building to building and conducting training sessions with the employees in the building, saying, okay, if you go into a lockdown, this is what you do. And then the other thing, and this is just a sign of the time, the students all knew how to react. They're learning this in grade school, they're learning this in high school, now they're at the college. We had never actually practiced a lockdown, but because of K-12 education, they knew what to do. And fortunately, we'd been going through training and having the discussions on our campus with the employees. So, and there's a lot of other things as well, but those are the main things. Now let me tell you, the world that we live in, and this is the briefing that I got the other day, how this whole thing unfolded. So this tweet went out with a threat against a school library, and it was read somewhere in the country, don't know where, I don't know where, and the FBI in Washington, D.C. got the notice that there was a Twitter they ought to check out. So they checked out the Twitter, they took it serious enough, they actually got a subpoena then to go to Twitter to identify the account. Then, once they had the account identified, they got another subpoena to go to AT&T to identify the person with the telephone. And by then, they knew that it was in North Dakota. And then they started pinging it, and that's how they were tracking it in North Dakota. Just amazing thing. The FBI has continued their investigation. The indication, I think, from the briefing is that unless there's a big red flag that comes up here in the 11th hour, that the FBI will be turning the case over to the state for any prosecutory activity after that. And that's a real thumbnail sketch of a very long day that we had. And I know other schools have experienced it. A few years ago, NDSU did an evacuation, didn't you, of the whole campus? Things we need to think about. We have 15 buildings on our campus proper. So when you lock down a building, you're locking down 15 buildings. It's not like one elementary school that's got 8 doors to it. It's 15 buildings that have multiple doors to it. So we learned a lot of lessons. The one final thing I'll say, and answer any questions, ma'am, if there are any, but we really appreciate Budget and Finance stepped forward for us. The Board Budget and Finance Committee stepped forward for us the other day. We had an allocation of about $300,000 for security on our campus. Well, one of the things that we found out, and I'd certainly encourage other folks to take a look at their inventory on this, but we had many of our classroom doors that could not be locked from the inside. And in some cases, it's a situation where the custodian unlocks the door and then the faculty member in there doesn't even have a key to that classroom. So we had a few cases, not many, but we had a few cases where they actually could not physically lock the classroom doors. So we're taking an inventory of all those locks, and we're going to make sure that all of our classroom and office doors can be locked from the inside and without a key. Just one of those things that when you lock down, you want to be able to do it very, very quickly. So that would...
President Scoggin, I really appreciate that. I guess my question to you is, and this is to all of the presidents, is what is your capability to send out messages?
Very good, I would say.
Okay.
First, and I don't know about the rest, Bismarck State, we've got a PA system into all of our facilities. And we can call in, so we were in the conference room when we decided to do the lockdown, picked up the telephone, called into the number, hit the code to go campus-wide. So within minutes of us deciding we were going to do a lockdown, we were making a public announcement. And then through the system-wide assurance, the text messages are sent out, and that's done very quickly. So we were on a computer. As soon as we had the voice message out, we were on the computer, and then that assurance sends a text message. It makes a telephone call to all the phones that are listed on there. So it'll be office phones, cell phones, home phones for each individual that's on the assurance. So that goes out. And then we used email, and then we used social media. A lot of folks were updating on social media, and so we were sending out social media. We were ironically, we were using Twitter to get the word out. And that's where the threat had come in. We felt very confident about getting the message out. And most people really that I've interacted with have really appreciated how quickly the word got out. But more importantly, the updates. Because those of us that are in the cell, we all know what's going on. but if you're locked down with 25 students in a darkened classroom someplace, but we were pushing stuff out so fast, and still 4.5 hours was excruciating. You know, after the fact, people said, well, you had a rough day yesterday, and I said, no, I didn't have a rough day. The faculty member with 25 students in a classroom had a rough day. So,
I agree with you. And first of all, let me just say, I really commend you for the way that this obviously was handled and turned out safely for all the students. You know, we did just address this at our last meeting and, you know, expressed our concerns about campus security. I would like to open this up. Dr. Hagerott?
I just want to commend Dr. Scogan, because I was in the lockdown with the Workforce Advisory Council and Richard Rothfuss, and eventually the Bismarck Police assumed command, but in that interim, he took command. His voice came up. You knew he was a colonel in the Air Force Missileer because he was in command, but I just want to say that he took personal responsibility because, you know, in some cases you might shy away from that, but it was Dr. Scogan in command, then eventually the Bismarck Police arrived, and then it went to that. But during that potentially chaotic, dangerous period, his voice came up. He told people what to do, and then he checked on all of us in our room, which was very much appreciated, that you kept us from breaking your rules. So he was very firm. You can't leave this room. So we were there for a long meeting, but it was very impressive. Thank you.
thank you.
Other comments?
You know, I would just say that since I had Brett check his phone, since we began the meeting, I've had one text, one phone call to my cell phone, and one message left on my office phone to notify, because, you know, it's a siren test, you have a siren go off, right? Brett had the same messages came in at the same time. And so the system really does work relatively quickly. And so, you know, that's a testament to exactly what President Scogan is saying, that we have an effective system to get the word out. We didn't have that years ago. And we had an incident at UND where there was a threat against a faculty member. Incredible, very credible threat, so much that we had a involuntary commitment order for this individual. And the faculty named were never notified. This person is still at large on campus, so it's supposed to be on. It says on. It's on. Good. Good. So anyhow, just the point, the modernization of how we notify people is so much better now. And I'm sure there was a phone call to the house as well. So that's just where we are today, and it's so much better than where we were 10 years ago.
I agree. Any other questions or comments? I guess I'd like to, before we move to Senator Flacco here, I would like to request of the Chancellor that we put together some sort of task force or something. I would nominate Dr. Scogan to be on it, since you have such firsthand knowledge, if you would. But I do think, I think this is so important that we need to review this, you know, system-wide. What are the capabilities? Do all of the colleges and universities have the capabilities that Bismarck State had in place? And can we build a task force?
It's added to his task list.
To his. Thank you very much. With that, Senator Flacco?
Madam Chair and members of the board, for the record, Senator Tim Flacco. I was supposed to hand out a document earlier today, or it's actually a draft document, more properly stated, during our joint meeting, but time got away from us. But it relates to our interfacing between campus and municipal police. Yesterday, we had a discussion in our interim meeting in the afternoon, and there was a lot of support for the intent of what we're handing out this afternoon, and so wanted to give it to the board, because kind of the intent also was that the board would look at this and view this draft as a starting point, and because we want to make sure we know and have some seamless. We see what cross-jurisdiction and how that can really help in many ways. And really the value of an integrated approach. It's been discussed with some of the campuses that currently have police force, as well as the Attorney General's office. And really to hope to leave it up to the board to review and recommend possibly a bill draft for the 2017 session, and really just want to get it on everyone's radar screen in terms of how that can be accomplished, as again, as it relates to Section 15-10-17 of the North Dakota Century Code. And if you're looking for an interface on that, it's 54-40.3-04, if you're looking for something to look up at this point. But nothing really to testify on. It's a real simple one, but it would set up a situation wherein they could have some working agreement between campus and the local jurisdiction. So just want to leave that for you so that you can have it on our radar screen, so that, because we all recognize that it's in our mutual goal to have safe campuses, so that when parents send their kids here, that we're doing the best job we can of making sure that it goes well for them. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. Dr. Scogan, thank you for your time. I just think that this is so important, and at this point, I would suggest that we include the review of this draft. Is this legislation, a proposed legislation?
Madam Chair, I had legislative counsel draft this document up based upon what our kind of wishes were. It's very, very simple,
It is.
which isn't always the case, we know.
To the point, though. Perhaps this could be reviewed by our task force and included in that process. Any thoughts or comments? Dr. Murphy?
One comment is, into some discussions with Chief Plummer of late, one of the, I think, important things is, the federal reporting Clery jurisdiction, or the Clery reporting area, includes areas adjacent to campus. In the Attorney General's office, my understanding is a ruling really restricted police activity around, off of campus, like across the street, even though all the crimes that occur across that street, I think, are reported in the Clery report. And so is it possible to merge these two ideas together so that our campuses with sworn law officers have a jurisdictional boundary that makes sense with what our federal reporting is for the Clery Act, with crimes occurring on or adjacent to campus? And I think that might be an important consideration as you move forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Once again, Senator, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. We'll move along to the Chancellor's report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Oh, just
Excuse me.
approve.
You're right. Approval of the December 10th, 2015 minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as they were presented to you? So moved. Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Christie?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Ness? Yes. Ms. Reichert? Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton? Yes. Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Now moving on to the Chancellor's report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to situate people here, we've got several things on the agenda, and I just wanted to start out first by thanking all the presidents and the cabinet. I spent several hours with Board Member Hacker getting through the blizzard last night. We were told by meteorologists it was good going, but I think we counted semi-trucks in the ditch, pickups, and all the rest. So we had time to talk, and I realized that we've been doing a lot of the Chancellor's cabinet and haven't got finished reports yet to come to you. So partly what you'll be hearing here in a report is a series of reports, just 5-minute snapshot from the different presidents and Board Member Ness, who's working on our governance committee. You'll also be hearing about 2 initiatives. Bakken U is already underway, but the Nexus of Unmanned Systems Cybersecurity, which is the governor's task force, and computing, which is a legislative directive. And all of these are focused on solving problems, correcting policies that will come to you eventually, but it may tie in very nicely to something that Chairman Nesset mentioned, and that is on the 23rd of May, we'll have an off-site bringing stakeholders into a meeting, which I think Senator Robinson suggested last year, and kind of grapple with some issues, the vision of the future, and perhaps at that point kick off a longer-term discussion called Vision 2030, that the governor has already ended that he would like to join us, many other stakeholders, which would be, for the want of a better word, is like what was done 15 years ago, bringing stakeholders together to try to envision the future. So these studies will feed into that. The cybersecurity, unmanned systems initiatives, these all feed into that. So that's the framework of what you're going to hear. And of course the budget, which, as Winston Churchill said, when you start to run out of money, you have to think. You can't do everything. So this budget process, we'll get through it. it's gonna come out better on the end, but it actually helps you focus priorities too. So that's the series of things. So it's a little longer as Chancellor's report, but you won't hear much from me. You'll hear eventually from Dr. Reedy, who has volunteered to be the director of the Nexus ND talk as well. So with that, though, I just wanted to welcome our new presidents who've joined us, former Governor Schaefer, former Secretary Schaefer, now President Schaefer, we all know. And if you wanted a few minutes, he warned me, he says he's a recovering politician, so he may take a couple hours. But if you can hold it to a couple minutes, sir, and you can, I guess, speak from the microphone from there.
Thank you. Madam Chairman,
No.
members of the board, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'll start over. Yeah, everybody can hear me anyway, right?
Yeah, I think the bottom of the button,
There's video streaming.
on the very bottom there.
Okay. Madam Chairman, Chancellor, members of the board, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to join you. I have to tell you, I really appreciate your support because it is a huge honor for Nancy and me to be serving in the leadership role at the University of North Dakota. It's fun to be back on campus, and I have to say that our reception there has been extraordinary. We've been greeted in every corner of the university, and as we've traveled around, and we've been in the in the dining facilities, in the union, we've been in classrooms and with faculty and the student senate, and been, you know, mixing with the people of the University of North Dakota. I've been extremely excited in the focus on excellence that is there. You know, sometimes you get a view of an institution from afar, and when you get inside and get the chance to mix with it, you find out how great everything really is. And that really is giving us a positive send-off as we have been greeted on campus. So again, I want to thank you for the opportunity. I do think that there are some challenges at the University of North Dakota that our team, that our students, our faculty, our staff are ready to take on that challenge, and I believe that we will build a better, stronger, and more responsive university for the people of North Dakota as we move forward. So I appreciate the opportunity, and as always, I was thinking actually Monday, having been in the chair, I was pretty disappointed that, you know, that dang governor started cutting our budgets already. but we're going to rise to the challenge, and I'm sure that Chancellor Hagerott is going to guide the university system through that budget challenge, and we all will come out for the better. So thank you for the opportunity, and if there's anything I can do, please let me know.
Do you mind passing the mic to Dr. Mitzel?
This on?
Bottom. Okay. It should be green light. Button's on the bottom.
Okay, now I'm good. Madam Chairman, Chancellor Hagerott, board members, everybody in the room, I want to reiterate much of what Dr. Schaefer said. The community coming in here has just been miraculous, and the enthusiasm that I see not just within our own region but across the entire state has been unmatched, anything I've ever seen. So it's been tremendous that way. Much like UND, we do have some issues at Dickinson that we'll need to address, and the Chancellor has been just wonderful in helping with many of these early areas. Some of our areas of focus are going to be on enrollment and retention, and that was a discussion from earlier today. But we would like to grow. We're sitting right around 1,300 students at the moment, and I'd like to see that closer to about 2,000, and we're going to do very slow, sustained growth, so we have the support in order to do that. Part of the growth of the enrollment also is just retention. If you can retain 5 to 10% more of your students, that's the same as growing your enrollment. Plus you have happier students who are on campus. So that's part of our main focus. I have a wonderful VP team. They always say surround yourself with folks who are smarter than you, and I was easily able to do that with my VP team, and they've been just wonderful. We're also working on the new foundation. We don't have the DSU Foundation any longer, but interim president Jim Osmond helped start the New Heritage Foundation. We hired a CEO who had been at DSU previously and was working at Sanford. He was quite a steal for us to get onto our campus. I threatened to move in with he and his wife if he didn't come back to DSU, so I think it was an easy decision for him. But he's been wonderful. Our first area of focus is on student scholarships. With the dissolution of the old foundation, we lost a great number of student scholarships, and the new foundation is helping to get those back. That's our first area of focus. But we are beginning to look at our 5-year and 10-year plans. And then next is just the community. The enthusiasm around Dickinson is so tremendous. We've been out multiple times every week talking to people in the area and having people over to the president's house. And I think Dickinson is ready for DSU to reemerge. And I have to thank Dr. Costin and Dr. Osmond a great deal for the work they did to get the institution ready to really move forward. There is one issue I do want to bring up. We do have a Title IX complaint. Right now it is just a complaint, and we're working to make sure that we have all the information placed in, and we'll keep everybody apprised of how that goes forward. I think we'll come out of this in a very positive fashion, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that was going forward.
And just to clarify, it's merely a complaint on percentages, not like there's some particular criminal event or anything like that. The percentages.
No. Percentages only. Percentages only.
Madam Chair, I just really want
Yes.
to grab clarification. As a board, we want to know about legal risk. Was it a court complaint or just a filed complaint with the institution?
It was not a court complaint.
Good point, thank you. And I think that is something that our, both our legal team as well as we do have a compliance officer who I'm sure will assist in keeping us informed on our exposure and risks there. Thank you.
Okay, the next Chancellor's item is budget guidelines. So while Tammy gets a microphone, what I wanted to do here is let her explain to you the process we're going through. Very collaborative. Chancellor's Cabinet, her working committee, which we established back in the fall as soon as we got the news that things were going to tighten. And what I'd like the State Board members to reflect on while she's giving the brief is I would like to propose a process where she continues to work on updating our guidelines, because we issued guidelines, which you had all been received about 3 weeks ago, working with the other presidents, based on a 2.5%. Well, it was 4.05. So I was going to be updating those guidelines, but these may be more restrictive, in particular relating to perhaps putting a pay cap across the whole system. So she'll give a brief, and then perhaps you can think about your feelings of how much the board would want to be involved in that. But the process I would propose, and during the wrap-up of future agenda items, maybe for a special board, is that my recommendation is that she and her team would continue to gather input, and different colleges have very innovative ways to respond. One is even proposing that, a cap above certain salaries for senior executives. But she'd work that, then I'd meet with the Chancellor's Cabinet next week, and then we might convene a special board where we could brief you on that and see if you'd want to vote on that. So we'll let her do her brief, and then you can think about it, and then at the end of our agenda, where we talk about future items, if you've had a chance to think about that process, if you want to modify that process, but as it exists right now, she would work it, the Chancellor's Cabinet would hear it, and then we'd come back to you in a special meeting. But if you want to adjust that or adopt, or even talk today about how you feel about a system-wide ranging salary cap or other issues you think. But again, this is such a fast-moving train. Normally we'd have weeks to do this, but Monday was announced 4.05. The planning factor had been 2.5, so we are adapting dynamically. And I want to thank Tammy and Lisa and my whole team who are, as I've said before, very undermanned, doing tremendous work. So, Tammy.
Thank you, Chancellor and Madam Chair. The Chancellor really explained, I guess, where we're at right now is we started in December talking about the potential for a budget allotment. The President, we've been working with the presidents and the VPs of finance. We had a committee that's been talking about this since then. We started out planning for a 2.5% allotment. We all know that's now 4.05% for the system, and that's all the institutions, the system office, and then the ag research institutions, Upper Great Plains, all of those institutions that report to the board. They have a total general fund budget of $1.01 billion, and so our allotment amount that we need to save across all those institutions is $41 million. Very large number. It affects everything, so even our capital projects, even the ones that are already in progress, everything is contained in that 1.01 billion budget, so it was all allotted again. So we need to come up with a plan. The group, the VPs and the presidents have already been doing that, and they, they're doing a very thorough job, and they are willing and able to do our fair share to balance the state's budget, and we really don't have a choice. We have to do it, but everyone has been very good to work with. As far as the timeline goes, we need to get to OMB some of our cuts just on a very high level, at the appropriation line level, by February 17th. So we have talked to the VPs of finance that are working on this group, in this group. And those will be coming into our office next week on the 11th, so we can look at those and make sure they're at OMB in a timely manner. The presidents will be submitting to the chancellor a more detailed plan around February 22nd. And that again it'll be at a little lower level, but it'll still be pretty high level. Just the major areas that they are going to be addressing, and how they are going to follow the guidelines that we have sent out. And of course, then the work won't stop then. This is going to be a long process of them making adjustments and probably revising their plans as we go on in order to meet the budget cuts. I guess I don't really have anything else to report right now, other than we're working on it, and we will continue to work on it until we've done what we need to do.
So again, to summarize, each campus is going to have most significantly latitude to do what they need to do to get in line. But given that we are the state of North Dakota, the system, the one common thread seems to be people's take-home pay, and they're allowed to go up to 3% salaries. And so the thought is, if some institutions are really strong and they say everyone gets the max pay raise and others are really struggling and they get zero, should there be some system-wide approach about capping that? Maybe you make less than $25,000, you can give the full raise, but if you're a senior executive, vice president, you get a 2%. So that's what we're going to work through with the Chancellor's Cabinet. So I've asked the state board members to cogitate on it, and we can come at the end to see if you like that sequence of her work, the Chancellor's Cabinet coming back to you in a special phone call meeting about a statewide policy, and that'd be about the only common, I think, restriction other than what's already out. We've already prioritized, no tuition raises, critical student services are protected, you don't affect, instruction in the classroom, but if you have lightly loaded classes, you combine, those type of guidelines. Okay? All right, so at this point, I'd like to let several presidents, starting with Board Member Ness, we have 6 chancellor's studies. One we won't brief. I appreciate Dean Brashani's work on the administrative cost study, but as Mark Sanford already briefed what we're doing with that, that's obviously a very big study, and we're going to be taking more of a leadership role with Brady Larson and Lisa and Tammy, supported by Dean Brashani's team from the campuses, so we won't brief that. But with this, governance is one of our studies, and I want to thank TISA for being, I'm the overall lead of the governance study, but TISA has, along with Board Member Ness, best practices, how to improve governance, and Larry Scogan, who won't brief, I don't think you need to brief this one, Larry, is basically doing a crosswalk of the roles and responsibilities and what we have in the code, because there was a question that came up with Larry Isaac, like, was there a legal conflict? So our lawyers are working on that, and that'll be sometime out later this spring. But with that, Mr. Ness, sir?
Okay, thank you, Chancellor. We have had a couple of meetings on governance. Most of the work is being done by President Mason. I did give each of the board members a hard copy on the work that we have been doing, and we would like your input related to this. To start with, we are working on the evaluation process, the review process for presidents and a chancellor, and this is where we are beginning, and we need your input on what should be included in this. We'll take that and use it in our next step. President Mason is also getting input from the presidents themselves, and we will put this all together and go from there. So if you have any questions, I can try to answer those. Chancellor, would you want to talk a bit about how you see the board members being involved in the review process?
Yes, sir. Obviously, remember, I arrived 1 July, and along with several new board members, and that's not the time to change everything. So we took the system we had, which my compliments to Dr. Scogan and the presidents who worked out the previous process. But it was clear from the HLC visit, several board members were like, can we continue to improve this? Answer is absolutely yes. You should have continuous improvement. And so one of the initiatives that I'm most likely going to roll out as far as the involvement of board members is, as we begin to review the president's metrics, performance, and their goals this spring, is to prototype maybe 3 or 4, maybe all 11 campuses where a board member would be asked to join me in that discussion with the president, so that you're early on in the process hearing what the performance has been and what their aspirations are and the goals. So early board involvement in the discussion. Again, I'm still responsible to work it all out, to get all the paperwork done, set up the meetings, but people geographically can perhaps, join in that process, and that will allow more board involvement. But we're mindful that as volunteers, you can't go to 11 meetings. It'd be overwhelming for all board members to attend 11 of those. So that is most likely my desire to go forward. And again, we can call it a prototype, or we can test it and see if it works, and then continue to modify. But what Board Member Ness and Tisa Mace are doing are studying best practices. Got some incredible materials done by Dr. Meredith on best practices for boards. And just to assure everybody here, there is no cookie cutter. People will say there's this model or that model. Very clearly, you need to look at the culture, the values of a state, and be sure that how you do these important governance functions are consistent with the nature of your governing structure. Almost every state has a different approach, partly because of law, culture, tradition. So. Anything else you want to cover then? Okay, Tisa, did you have anything you wanted to say? I kind of stole your thunder a little bit. She's been incredible, and I appreciate all the hard work. So I think Board Member Hacker, did you have something you wanted to say?
Madam Chair, I spoke on this on our last board meeting, and I don't want to take up a lot of time. I truly appreciate the progress that's been made. I want to step back to my comments of the last board meeting, which was really directed at a framework of goals that the chancellor would set and review with the individual presidents that could be briefed to the board, but that the board, I don't believe, should be in the business of conducting those reviews. And the first bullet point kind of really leans towards that. Individual board member is going to assist in the goal setting and the annual review. I don't feel it's the intention of myself when I joined this board anyways, and I don't want to speak for any others, but my role is not to review individual presidents' goals or their annual performance. I feel that that is strictly something that should occur between the chancellor and the cabinet, and that our job as the board is to review the goals and conduct a review with a committee of the chancellor.
And I appreciate that vote of confidence. And that is one model, most strictly known as the Carver model, where I'm like a very empowered chancellor to do those things. But that's what the feedback form is for. If we find that the consensus of the board is they want to shift more of that to me, I'm certainly willing, but I just want people to know that I'm collaborative and open to a more participative role earlier on.
Well, just to follow up what Mr. Hacker said, is this set by board, or is this a higher learning commission issue? Maybe this is not our jurisdiction to.
Well, and that's why we're doing the best practices, which we're studying. If we would implement, there's certain models you can, every state can be different. I've talked to 3 different chancellors on how they do it, and every state's different. You might want to call it a Carver hybrid or whatnot, certain aspects. So it's really up to us as a board to determine the level of intervention, involvement you want to. There's no law. It's up to us to build this, and our culture with our open records and other things are a key distinguishing factor, as we're seeing in the UND search. So your input, how Mr. Hacker feels about it, or other members have felt about it, and some of them, I know, were at the Higher Learning Commission, felt they want to be more involved earlier on in the process. So we're evolving, and again, nothing's set in stone. This could be a hybrid. We could try this with 3 colleges to see if people find this useful to be engaged early.
Well, I think as we work through this process, I think we need to keep all these thoughts in mind, especially to board members tasked with this. Mr. Ness?
Just a response to Nick here. My thoughts on this, and we had this discussion in our meeting, that the board is actually the hiring and firing group for our presidents and our chancellor. And I do believe we need to be involved in this rather than just having the chancellor take this on his own. And if we can come to that conclusion, I think that is a direction that we should be working toward. And I believe that's what the Higher Learning Commission really wanted us to do, to be involved in this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Dr. Murphy?
So having participated in the HLC visit there in Bismarck, yeah, it became really interesting to see that they were really concerned that this board did not have enough hands-on experience, or experience is the right word, but hands-on process with the evaluation of the presidents. And I think when you look at models, it might be important to look at, you know, a state might do it this way, but that state, there are states where the chancellor hires and fires presidents. We are a state in which the board hires and fires presidents. That's what we do. And so, you know, I think as we look at broadly that way, if you have that authority, then you shouldn't be involved a bit more than we have been in the evaluation process. And I don't know about a board member there with the chancellor. Might be a good idea. I haven't really thought about it. But I think certainly we have to do a better job of, and unfortunately it's public live streaming, is, you know, tell a president what we think's going well and what we think's not going so well, and what are the plans on improving or continuing, you know, on various courses depending upon what needs to be done. And so I think we need to be involved in that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I think there's several. I'm sorry. Carrie, go ahead.
Well, I just have two comments. One, you know, it's kind of, for some of us, this is a deja vu. I guess it would be the three of us. You know, we did talk about this right when we joined the board. This was a topic of conversation. I think, Don, you and I talked a little bit during that meeting about it's not just what you do, but how you do it. And I think that would just be something I'd like to see added as a goal in evaluating, you know, not only whether established metrics have been met, but also, you know, a commitment to the values of the system and alignment with those values. And I think, you know, we've got them listed here. I think that's a really important piece of what we do in building a culture across the system and holding people accountable for being part of that culture, and including ourselves, I think. The other comment I have is that I just hope that, and I think this is probably implied, but whatever process we come out with is respectful and positive. I know a few years ago, a couple of us were involved where we had a process that was not managed well, I don't think, and resulted in probably some needless angst. And so I just think that it would be, I think that would be another objective that I would suggest.
Could I clarify one thing? The presidents are also being asked exactly the same thing. How would they like to do this? So this is about them. Having been through, I think, about 35 years of evaluations, it can be done right and can be done wrong. So they will be part of this process, too.
Mr. Morton?
I think all the arguments are good, and it's a discussion we need to have. I'm always, I have a bias towards Nick's suggestion as board members. I don't know if this is an area of expertise that we have, but it's certainly worth the discussion. I'll go back to my, when I was a football coach, I had a favorite saying, I'm getting weary of being shown the light by people who can't do what I do, but know I'm not doing it right. And I'm very respectful of that. I don't know if I'm qualified to judge a president.
Well said. Mr. Ness?
Just one clarification. I talked about hiring and firing, and that is really not the focus of this evaluation process, the review process. It is an evaluation for growth. I mean, and that is what we will focus on. But if there is no growth, then you go to the next step.
I appreciate that clarification. I think that's getting us back on the right track here. Thank you. And I would suggest that obviously what you and Dr. Mason will be doing is taking all these comments, you know, back to your group and listening. Thank you.
Okay, the next study is our highest priority one, I would say, though lots of priorities are moving up as the ground changes. But Dr. Hagan, are you here somewhere to talk about retention, nutrition? Again, the legislature is very generous, provided funds for this. He's been leading this group incredibly vigorously, and I'll turn it over to him to give you about 5 to 7 minutes on what you're doing there. And Tisa's also the co-chair of this one, is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, Madam Chair and board members, Chancellor, for the record, I'm Gary Hagan, President of Mayville State University, and the Chair of the Retention Study Committee. And as we just said, my partner in crime, my Vice Chair, is Dr. Tisa Mason, President of Valley City State. And our committee also includes other presidents, board staff, institutional researchers, student service personnel, and we also have tribal campus representation. I think it was obvious this morning through the discussion with our legislators that our charge is important for lots of reasons. It's complex, it's not well understood, people seem to take sides. It's time for a more scientific approach. So our first duty as a group was to determine what our appropriate focus was. So based on all that, here it is. I have paper for you. But the role of the Retention Study Committee, as we see it, to provide the leadership and oversight necessary to ensure gains in retention and graduation rates. That's our statement. To provide the leadership and oversight necessary to ensure gains in retention and graduation rates by, and then we have four things. A, providing leadership and campus oversight for a successful PAR implementation. And I might have misled some people early on. We're not overseeing the PAR implementation per se, that we're paying for that, those people are there. But the campus aspects, as PAR is implemented, it affects people on the campus. They have to get involved, they need resources, there's busy people. So all that campus activity are the kind of things we can provide oversight for. The second is ensuring appropriate retention and graduation metrics and best practices to ensure continuous improvement. In other words, we want a tool and a process in place that's going to work. Far out. C, reporting progress and challenges across the campuses, the Chancellor's Office, and the State Board of Higher Education, which happens to be doing what I'm doing right now. And D, providing for ad hoc committee oversight when needed. We can already see there's going to be some things coming up. I'm going to have to draw a few people, the appropriate people out of the big group, so we can be nimble and get the job done and attack right away. What we don't want is have a problem or potential problem fester and get worse over time. We need a good implementation. Sometimes in the past, occasionally we had a major software application or IT situation that didn't go well and it caused some consternation. Some of you remember some of those. So we're going to try to do this one real well and real clean, and we're going to keep our eyes on it. Historically, our campuses have had a need for better tools and data to really understand what causes and what improves retention and graduation rates. From my own standpoint, I'm not sure. I see the rates go up and down, and when I think I have it, they go down. I think I do something wrong, and they go up. It's elusive. Fortunately, the legislature has appropriated funds for a powerful data system that will help us. It will help us provide us with more metrics and therefore the ability to make better decisions. Of course, the tool is a predictive analysis reporting, or the PAR framework. As you probably already know, PAR provides analytics as a service to institutional members. Their databases include more than 351 two-year, four-year, public, proprietary, and traditional institutions with over 2,600,000 student records to draw from. So we will have data. Therefore, PAR can help the North Dakota University system identify points of student loss and to develop effective practices to improve student retention. Our committee has determined that ensuring success of the PAR initiation should be one of the first tasks that we do. Without these new tools, we'd continue to move forward without complete data or proper metrics from which to make meaningful decisions. In other words, we keep doing the best we can with what we have now. And that's not the point. To help keep track of the PAR process itself, Dr. Mason and I spent considerable time with the PAR project manager, David Canerza, and we also met with the CEO of PAR, Beth Davis, to further ensure transparency between the PAR initiative and the campus's efforts to improve retention. We've also joined the Executive Steering Committee of PAR. So we sit on that committee and we go to those meetings. That gives us a good bird's eye view of what's happening on that side, and that should help us. If anything's happening there, we should have a step ahead and get to the campuses or this committee and say, something's coming up, here it is, what do we do? We had a meeting on December 22nd. All the retention study committee members viewed actual screenshots from the predictive analytics program. It was very interesting to see how the 5 stages of the implementation could help provide structure as our campuses move forward. And just very briefly, there's 5 steps, 5 major steps in our application. The first one is student analysis. Got to get all the student data in from all our campuses. That's a lot of data. They started at UND, went to VCSU, Mayville State. I think they're at Minot now. And as one gets the student data in, they go to the next step, which is predictive tools. And then moves on to a third, intervention strategies. So we have student data, we have predictive analysis going on, and then intervention strategies. What are we going to do with them? How can we help them? And these are going along as the campuses come on board. The fourth one is benchmarking, real numbers, reliable numbers. That's going to be very important. And fifth, ties to institutional goals. So this is going to take just into 2017, March, although what we're learning on the oversight committee is they're learning how to do this better, it might be less. So in about a year, all the campuses should have gone through all 5 of these steps. And that's a lot of research in a year, because every one of these steps will be new to us. And it's going to be a lot of work. It's a big initiative. It's bigger than what I thought. I thought when the chancellor put me on here, I could collect some data, look at it, do a summary report, and I'd be done. Not going to happen. This is going to take some time. But these 5 stages of implementation will help schedule the work of the campuses by providing timely study topics, one after another, throughout the process. This should in turn balance the workload for the campus employees most responsible for the actual work and ensure that all campuses become fully equipped to positively affect retention and graduation rates. It's going to provide a nice structure. We didn't know that going in. It just kind of fell in place. I'd like to take credit for that, but I absolutely can't. But we did discover it. The committee's next action step is to have IVN presentations on all 11 campuses. These meetings will be held February 3rd, which is today, and on February 18th over our IVN system. The sessions will provide a demonstration of the PAR tool and will cover predictive analysis, benchmarking, and tying interventions to student success. In addition to the overview of the tools, a demonstration will walk through several real-life examples, and in the last half of the hour will be Q&A. So hopefully that's going good today. I'll probably find out later tonight how that went. The second session, February 18th, is a repeat of the first one. We just want to get as many people involved as possible. As I mentioned, March 7, 2017 is scheduled completion date. It appears it might be quicker. And I would say because of the sophistication and all the activities, the fact that we measure retention, graduation rates in 4-year, 6-year things, we're going to have a little patience. It's nice, you know, in a year from now we'll have the tools, powerful tools, analytics we've never had, but it's going to take at least the year for campuses to gear up. It should be a different world after that, all having the same tools, all powerful, sharing. This is truly a system endeavor, so we look forward to getting this done. Our committee also discussed PAR and its relationship to Starfish and other related software. The consensus seemed to be that Starfish was what was recommended. However, other software that interfaces properly with PAR is probably acceptable. Now, as we know, Hobson's has acquired PAR, and we're not yet totally sure what to expect with the Hobson's and the Starfish interface scenario. This is something we're just going to have to report on once we know more, and we will have our eyes open. Our first indication is we're told that the PAR implementation should go on just the way it was. But anytime we have new ownership and management, it does change the scenario somewhat, and we'll talk more about that. But we will be on that. So in summary, our group has defined its long-term role. The PAR implementation is going along well, I think ahead of schedule, actually. The campuses are moving ahead with regards to retention improvements on their respective campuses in their own ways. So in approximately 1 year, all the campuses will know much more about retention and graduation rates. They'll all have powerful new tools. We'll be much more scientific, and we'll see how it goes from there. But it will be a busy year. So questions?
Any questions from the board? Ms. Tufte?
Dr. Hagan, can you indicate, or perhaps Chancellor Hagerott, is the task force looking at the development of any modules or training materials for the staff and faculty who will be using the scores that are applied directly to students as you import into Starfish for the ethical and appropriate use of our anticipated retention rate for a student of a profile versus, you know what I mean? To be good stewards of that information so that we're helping to apply strategies, but that we're not allowing for the anomalies that sometimes happen in data that those profiles wouldn't indicate.
That specific question hasn't come up. I asked PAR what similar things, and they said they provide the training and so forth. That's not really what you're talking about. I'm seeing that, and maybe Richard or somebody could fill in more. But I see that as the kind of things our ad hoc need now and then is to take comments like that and go to the campuses and say, how are we going to do this? We need to do this, because that will be new, because we'll have a very high-powered system. We're going to have data we've never had in huge quantities, and with data comes responsibility, and all those things are very important. So that is part of our role. When I say campus oversight and ad hoc action now and then, I see that as that type of things. But Richard, has there been any conversation?
It's part of the implementation from PAR is that training and helping faculty and staff learn how to use the tool. But the institutional cultures are so varied.
I think your question went deeper, though, in terms of maybe even almost legally what can you shouldn't do.
But maybe we can follow up one-on-one and get you the answer on that.
I just think that it's important as we start using predictive data that we also keep in mind we're dealing with human clients who sometimes their actions and choices occur outside of what we would expect in data, and that we use that appropriately.
Appreciate that. And I think that should go back to the committee, and I'm sure Dr. Mason and Dr. Hagan will.
But our institutional research people are built into the committee, so we don't have a void as we go.
I'm not so concerned about the institutional researchers as I am once we start getting down into the day-to-day faculty-staff interactions. And as we start looking at what that retention rate might be for a specific student, and if we're providing training for the faculty and staff that have that, and potentially in an ongoing manner, like some of the resources that have come out through the system office using ALT and some of those online learning modules, so that that appropriate use of data becomes part of our conversations on campuses.
Thank you.
Certainly, and we look for if you want to be more involved. You seem to have a lot of knowledge on that. So. Okay, next one. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you
Hagan.
very much.
And again, your energy is much appreciated. Dr. Richmond, do you mind giving us a quick synopsis? Dr. Richmond is leading a team, and again, all these are teams of people, stakeholders across the campuses. He is leading the tuition study, which include fees and then waivers. We added that in, as we mentioned earlier. So go ahead, Dr. Richmond.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, Chancellor Hagerott, thank you for this opportunity. The Tuition and Fees Study Group is a group of students, faculty, staff, administrators, presidents. We have met 3 times. The scope of our work I'll break into 2 phases. Phase 1, the scope of our work is to review the current tuition and fee model. Compare that to other state models. Take a look at the progress that each institution is making to moving forward to meeting the requirements of the current model by fall 2018. We will also be reviewing all of the revenue sources that come into each campus. And at your March 15th meeting, we will be coming forward with suggested modifications to the current model. Along with those modifications, we will bring the rationale for our reasoning to modify the 5 principles, if any, as well as much data as we can possibly bring with that to support the modification. We will come forward, as I said, to the March 15th meeting with those modifications. We will also come forward with a request that if at all possible, at your following month's meeting, your April meeting, that if you are going to take any actions or give us any directions, that you could do so at that April meeting. It will expedite our ability to move forward in meeting that tuition and getting things in line to do so. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is waivers. And as we learned this morning, it is a hot topic. And as Representative Sanford indicated this morning, it's hard to disconnect state appropriation for our institutions from tuition. And it is equally hard to separate the connectivity between tuition and waivers. They're all very closely linked. You move one domino and it affects the other dominoes. So again, the rationale for some kind of direction at your April meeting is because we can't make a final decision to make any recommendations about waivers until we know what the tuition is really going to be looking like. When it comes to waivers, we will start meetings this month to discuss waivers. The scope of that project is to define waivers, to take a look at the current state of waivers by institution, and then come forward with any suggested recommendations at a future meeting, potentially your May meeting for waivers. But again, without direction in April, that'll be difficult to do. And with that, I would entertain any questions. Chancellor?
And based on the energy of the debate this morning, I would just modify slightly. We haven't had a chance to talk. Is we probably will wait on recommendations and let stakeholders weigh in more, I think, in May, meaning getting the data. You know, these are what these waivers are, this is what they are. Maybe we can get data on people who had waivers stay here. Businesses can talk about how important these people are, and that we may step back a little bit, you know, and let that debate work in May, and then maybe take away something from that we can produce some recommendations. But I think it's becoming such an issue that we probably just want to get the data out and as Dr. Hagan was saying, get some science behind numbers and some granularity. So,
okay. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your work. All right, so I know we are taking a little bit of time here. Steve, do you want to take a couple minutes on shared services? Okay.
Chair Nessett, members of the board, Chancellor, thank you for the opportunity. I am chairing the Shared Services Task Force, and coming out of Monday's announcement from the governor, I think it's very timely. Certainly, he talked about a number of areas where all state agencies can be more efficient and make changes, and certainly cooperative services, shared services was one of those areas he specifically mentioned. So I think our work here is very timely in the current situation. Our group has met 3 times thus far. Vice Chair of the committee is Dr. Richmond, in the room here also on the committee, Dr. Nadolny, Dr. Migler, Dr. Feldner, Dr. Darling, and Tammy Dolan. So there's a number of folks on the committee, and then others as well from other campuses, vice presidents and so forth. We had a really interesting conversation earlier this week with a chief financial officer from the MNSCU system. MNSCU, the Minnesota State College and University System, has done a number of things in this area over the last number of years, and so we heard from them some of the activities they've done and some lessons learned and so forth, and that's spawned some additional thoughts as we move forward. We've been sort of doing an environmental scan, if you will, and taking a look at what currently is going on in the system in the NDUS relative to shared services. and trying to find out what is currently at work. There are actually quite a few things going on between 2 campuses or 3 campuses, and we've been trying to kind of get our arms around that so we can get a bit of a list here and see what all is going on. And so from that, we're also taking and learning from those campus cooperative agreements. Are there ways that this could be rolled out further to a system-wide or to more than just 2 or 3 campuses sharing the information? And so we're moving forward with that. We're also kind of breaking up the possibilities into here's what's going on currently, here's maybe some low-hanging fruit, and then here's some other sharing of services that might take a bit more work and take a bit more effort down the road. So there's some things that we're probably going to end up recommending for more immediate possibilities, and some other things that probably are going to take a little bit more time and effort. But just to give you a sense of flavor, some of the various areas, and then I'll wrap up. Shared services in the way of payroll, Title IX services, internal audit services, human resources, international student processing, H-1B visa processing, learning management systems, iPads reporting, purchasing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, risk management, compliance, vendor maintenance, and so on. So that kind of gives you a flavor. A lot of what we've been looking at are a lot of the things, frankly, that occur in more of the business affairs or business office side of the enterprise. And so we have several business VPs that are part of this group that have been helpful. So that's kind of where we're at this point, and look forward to having a full report and some recommendations for you in the months ahead.
Thank you.
Questions?
All right, thank you, Dr. Shirley. Appreciate you leading. That's not an easy committee, and we put more pressure on them with the budget tightening to find some, maybe some quick wins. Okay, if Dr. Scogan is still here, he's leading the mission study, and really there's 2 phases. One is focused early on a 2-year and 4-year. Phase 2, which will kick off coinciding with around the 23rd of May, hearing the stakeholders, is the larger mission, some of the big fundamental questions that includes perhaps size of campuses, growth, some of the issues that have been fairly complex and been in the paper. Again, using Gary Hagen's thing, get them in a scientific discussion sequentially with stakeholders all having a chance. So I thank him again for leading up this study.
Chancellor did a good job summarizing that. Are there any questions?
Well, if you want to take 5 minutes, because we're behind a little bit. Some people's 5 minutes are time warped here.
So, as the Chancellor said, Phase 1 is really focused on the workforce, and I'll read you our specific key question. Are the state's economic, education, and workforce needs being met by the current structure of and program delivery, which is both methods and levels, by the North Dakota university system and its individual institutions? It's a pretty broad question, but are we meeting the needs of the state economically, educationally, and for workforce? In some cases, we will also be looking at the question, should more specific targeted mission changes be expedited due to urgent workforce and industry needs? And that specifically looks at things like this board has already decided, for example, to move forward on the MAT at 3 different institutions. You made that decision to meet what you believe is the current workforce need, and so those are the kinds of questions that we're asking in this. Now, to get at this, the most exciting part about this, I think, is we're developing a mission study survey. And this has really been a heavy IR effort, and thanks to Steve Shirley and his faculty as well for stepping up in the development of this. So we have collaboratively NDUSIR, BSCIR, Minot State IR, and Minot State faculty all working on this. And just completing this survey, comments were due back this Monday, and we will get this survey out across the state. Asking people that very questions, are we meeting your needs? And then we'll compile the information from that survey. We'll compare that to what's actually going on at each institution in each one of the regions and see if we're meeting their needs, and then if not, are there mission changes that have to be made. The Phase 2, the Chancellor has asked me to put together, which we will kick off after we've got the survey out and we can start taking a look at some other things, but is really more a demographic analysis of our institutions. And the Chancellor has asked me to look at, for example, what are the enrollments versus the capacity of a particular institution. Is there and should there be any sort of required mix relative to out-of-state students versus in-state students versus foreign students? What's the best mix for graduate versus undergraduate? Should there be targets in diversity at our institutions? And of course, how does all this play? This is all knowledge work that's going on at the institutions, and how does all of those numbers and diversity and demographics fit into the knowledge work that's going on at the institutions? So that will be phase 2 of it. Any questions?
And again, these are all just extraordinarily busy people taking on extra duties. If you think about it as a disaggregated biggest think tank in North Dakota, 11 campuses with all these doctoral degree-holding faculty, administrators, and graduate students helping solve our problems. But all of this, I believe, will eventually lead to information for this board and stakeholders, perhaps on the 23rd of May, to really grapple with where do we see the future going on some hard questions, where there isn't just yes, no, right, wrong. What are we as a culture? So they'll have recommendations as professional educators, but they clearly this is a decision for people of North Dakota and communities on some of these. Well, leading to that, there's been a couple things, just like this board moved out quickly on the MAT. Do you want to take a break at this point? Would that be good, or do you want to just keep plowing through? We've been going.
I opt to keep plowing through. Board members?
Keep plowing? Okay.
Okay.
So just like the board responded quickly on the MAT, there was a teacher shortage. There's 2 other areas that we're responding quickly, and I've talked twice about it already, but if Dr. Reedy's here, I'd like him to come forward to talk about the Nexus ND. This is the intersection of 3 initiatives that are already fairly mature in the state, but bringing them together in a dynamic way: unmanned systems, high-performance computing, and cybersecurity. As he's sitting down, I just want to thank him, but is Dr. Nygaard here, Ken Nygaard? Yeah. He has volunteered from NDSU to lead the cybersecurity effort, which is one of the governor's top priorities now. And Dr. Majimsi here is leading the unmanned systems. Each of these have deputy from the opposite big campus, and then Dr. Feldner, I guess just stepped out. She is working with Mike Resser, oh, there she is, for high-performance computing. So what Dr. Reedy will do is give you a basic overview of this, but I just want to thank these volunteers and several of their deputies and co-chairs and Josh's team that have volunteered their time. We know money's tight, and it's just a profoundly important issue such that I think Chair Nesset heard this and Member Hacker at the UND Search Committee. Several research vice presidents talked about how unique North Dakota has positioned, but you have to move fast on these type of technologies because everyone else is beginning to realize the lead we have. So with that, Dr. Reedy, if you'd like to talk about this initiative. And he's our director of this initiative, and he'll cover it.
Thank you, Chancellor Hagerat. Chairman Nesseth and members of the board. I know it's difficult to see, and I apologize for that. I did not bring handouts, so I will try to talk you through the fine print, and again, I apologize for that. I know you've been introduced to this concept or this initiative by Chancellor Hagerat, but wanted to take a moment to reiterate what Nexus ND is about and give you an update of where things are at and give you a sense of what the objectives will be of the initiative. There we go. Nexus ND is really a combination or a nexus of 3 primary pillars. The first being cybersecurity, and really you can think of this as not just cybersecurity, but a modern IT workforce. And having the ability to put into place programs and curricular considerations that bolster our state's viability moving forward. I think we have an opportunity to do this from within the North Dakota University system and a chance to be unique by taking a system approach to cybersecurity and IT workforce as opposed just to having autonomous or individual institutions move forward. On the same token, I think there are opportunities for partnership even within the region. As a matter of fact, a small institution that Dr. Shirley is intimately familiar with, Dakota State University in Madison, South Dakota, actually has recognition by the National Security Agency as a center of excellence and a mission to help other institutions or systems, in our case, develop cybersecurity programming. So I think there's an opportunity to move quickly on this, to meet not only state but regional national needs, but to really focus on developing the type of IT workforce that companies such as Microsoft and others may want and may need, and ultimately to make North Dakota the most attractive environment possible for a future economy. The next pillar is unmanned aerial systems. And really, if you even want to take area out, unmanned systems. And I think it goes without saying that North Dakota is uniquely positioned to excel in this area. I think that Nexus ND has the opportunity to be even more deliberate in creating a holistic environment that meets the needs of the industry, not now, just in its infancy, but as it reaches maturity. You'll see in a moment a quote from Lieutenant Governor Wrigley, but I had the opportunity to be in Israel last week, and we were hosted by a company called Elbit, which manufactures the Hermes 450, which an NDSU researcher will be flying, and it'll be the first intermediate-sized UAS flown in commercial airspace in the United States. Right here in our backyard, right here in North Dakota. I think that's a substantial accomplishment. But without violating their non-disclosure agreement, I can tell you that I felt better walking out of that meeting about Nexus ND and our forward-thinking approach than going into the meeting, because it aligns very close with their corporate strategy.
And if I could just reiterate, that's an NDSU professor.
NDSU professor.
Yeah. People keep thinking everything's happening north. That's why it's so important to collaborate, that this is led by UND, and then the co-lead is NDSU.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With this, it's capitalizing on what we're doing, but also trying to think about the next step, because in reality, there's flight operations, there's training, which is very much like UND aviation, and there's the goal of commercialization. There's a lot of work in the center that needs to take place to reach the potential of unmanned aerial systems. And really, that's the next pillar, which is high-performance computing and big data. In essence, you have to be able to take information from the field. In the case of the Hermes 450, 12 terabytes of data generated in one run, which is tremendous. Without any analysis, that's relatively useless. What we want to do is be able to process that and transport that into something that is meaningful, so that someone can take their phone out and look at their phone and have a viable product, viable information that helps them become better producers, that helps us have a better infrastructure for the nation. Those are really the three pillars of Nexus ND, and really the opportunities that I think we have the potential to help the state realize. Again, just to reiterate, those three pillars we believe come together. We can move outside of the traditional sectors of agriculture and energy. This will help us become better informed in a number of areas. A great example, President Hagan talking about the Predictive Analytics Reporting Framework, PAR. That is really big data. That is really using compute power to take from data trends and use predictive analytics to help us become better at what we do. Whether it be higher education or healthcare, we have an opportunity to capitalize on that. But recognizing that these endeavors are not cheap, and if we want to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, we have to be mindful of how we approach this. And I think that's where the nimbleness of the state of North Dakota, our ability to work collectively, allows us to really take a lead position in the nation. We're never going to have the resources of other states, but I can tell you that we have the environment that I think is most desirable, and that's the other message that I heard from Elbit. Of all the states in the United States that a company from Israel may want to be in, North Dakota was attractive for that very reason. We value getting things done. As simple as that may sound, it's very powerful.
And if I could thank Josh, he was at a meeting with Lieutenant Governor and Prime Minister Netanyahu. Over the holiday, a former friend of mine is now the Deputy Secretary of Defense. On his desk, I visited the Pentagon, is the study of unmanned systems. They are desperate to solve this problem, and just in the last couple days, a major NASA $200 million drone was hacked over the Pacific. They barely got it home, and Homeland Security on the border was hacked by a narco-terrorist group. We have the opportunity to help the Air Force, Homeland Security solve a problem so profound they just about lost control of basically parts of our Air Force. And we're on the map as long as we move quickly with volunteers like NDSU, UND, and all the campuses, which wasn't emphasized. All the campuses are involved. 2-year Dr. Skogan, 4-year Dr. Shirley, and Ken Nygaard is the godfather of all these computer science professors on our team, I found out later. They were his students. So just keep the heart beating for another 10 years for us there, okay? Go ahead.
That's a reiteration of what Nexus ND really is, to give you an update of where we're going, and we have focused much on governance and getting things off the ground. And so really the governance consists of a board, which is really the president's, And in addition to the presidents, Board Member Morton and others have agreed to be part of that. We're trying to have a holistic approach, but again, nimble enough to get things done. From that governing board, we will have an executive group, which really has representations from the different tiers of the university system. And that group will allow us to make initial decisions and do a little bit more heavy lifting that then we can take back to the overall governing board. For each of the pillars that I made mention of, there is actually going to be a working group. And moving to this slide, again, the names are hard to read, but the lead and co-lead have been recognized. And in the case of the cyber group, the entire work group has been recognized and has already met. The other two groups, the working groups, will be invited this week, and we'll hopefully begin meeting within a few days' time. The cyber group is the largest, and in part because there are curricular considerations that we anticipate being felt by all 11 institutions and wanting to have that type of input. The other two areas, HPC and Big Data and UAS, the groups will be a bit smaller, simply because the interest isn't quite as widespread, or the impact isn't quite a widespread across the university system. The lead of the HPC Big Data is Lisa Feldner. Mike Ressler, who is the director of ITD, is the associate lead, and that group is most closely aligned with the governor's cybersecurity task force. In the case of UAS, Grant Majimsi, the new vice president for research at the University of North Dakota, is the lead, and the co-lead is Aaron Reinholtz. And I had the pleasure of being in Israel with Aaron last week, so we had an opportunity to talk a little bit then. In the case of cybersecurity, Ken Nygaard is the lead, and Prakash is the co-lead, and Prakash is actually one of Ken's students. So again, as the chancellor indicated, Ken is certainly the godfather of computer science in not only the state and the region. So we anticipate these work groups being productive and completing the work in a timely fashion. To support this, again, the chancellor already called this out, but I'll just reiterate, there is a facilitation team. I am the director of this project, and the associate director is Dan Klenow from North Dakota State University. Staff members you see there are all members of my staff at the University of North Dakota who have worked very hard on this initiative and will continue to work hard on this initiative to see it through. Last but certainly not least, want to go over just at a very high level some of the objectives overall that we anticipate, and really again wanting to focus on workforce. That is a critical area of helping the state get past commodity-based economy. And we want to, again, have a welcoming environment so that companies like Elbit and others will hopefully look at North Dakota as not just a place to fly UASs, but a place to conduct research and development and ultimately to perhaps manufacture that equipment as well. The research agendas for North Dakota State University and the University of North Dakota are paramount as well. Trying to take the pillars of Nexus ND and embed that at the core of research activities of the two universities to help augment or boost what they're already doing. These are tools that, as I hear President Shirley speak of shared services, I think we have a great opportunity to share some of these services and, again, be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, especially in the current economic climate. Another objective that we would have, I think, again, is very well illustrated by the trip to Israel last week, which is to aggressively pursue partnerships. Not only corporate or private partnerships, but partnerships with other entities such as Dakota State University, as I mentioned earlier. I think we have an opportunity to stretch our dollar as far as possible by bringing others to the table. And I will not bore you with detail, but I can tell you that the visit last week was well worth the effort, and there are many opportunities to be had. The UAS industry in particular, but also the cyber industries are in their infancy, and together with big data and high performance computing, tightly wound together. And the fact that we have a system approach pulling those tenets together, I think bodes well for us as a state, because others simply do not have the vision that we have right now. Regarding high-performance computing and big data, this board unanimously approved a concept of a collaborative center for computation and data last year, and part of this Alignment with House Bill 1003, Section 8 is to realize that, and to do so in such a way that it benefits all of our institutions and provides the resources that each of our institutions need to be viable players with big data and high-performance computing. At a recent economic development legislative testimony, we learned too that even state government has similar needs. And so there may well be the potential to not just do this on behalf of higher education, but to do this on behalf of higher education and government. And for those of you who may not recall what your predecessors approved, that concept is unique because it's extending a very rare and costly resource, not just within higher education, but to private entities, private industry. That's the type of magnet that we believe can make North Dakota attractive, not just our runways, but our people, and our people using modern tools to work with the large data sets that those UASs and other sensors will procure, whether it be digital agriculture or healthcare. These are the types of tools, this is the type of infrastructure we need. Lieutenant Governor had a quote in the paper, and if you didn't see that, a little blurb I thought was nicely written, but very exciting to have the Elbit Hermes 450 being flown in North Dakota. In a later meeting, Ben Israel, who is Benjamin Netanyahu's top advisor for cybersecurity, had a smile on his face when I spoke with him because he won the Israel Defense Award for the Hermes 450 accomplishments on the battlefield. And to see how that's come full circle when he was responsible for the Israeli equivalent of DARPA, and now seeing it being flown in United States of America's commercial airspace for the purpose of agriculture, really shows how far that industry has come and really puts us on the map. And without going into detail, I think opened the door for us to perhaps be one of the first, if not the first, institutes of higher ed to have a formal relationship with an Israeli university, and in that case, the Tel Aviv University. Last but certainly not least, part of an exciting endeavor by the National Science Foundation, which is their regional big data hubs. The University of North Dakota is fortunate enough to be a co-PI on a grant that is led by the University of Illinois and the company of the University of Michigan, Indiana University, and Iowa State University. On February 11th, we will be releasing or submitting a proposal for the next round of funding that we've had the pleasure of working with NDSU on, and the University of North Dakota would be the lead with Michigan State, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and Iowa State partnering with us on that. That proposal, again, without getting a tremendous amount of details, talking about data life cycle. That middle swath that I mentioned, going from UAS to commercialization, it came out of the region with the top internal score, and I hope that it is favorably viewed by the National Science Foundation because, again, it is another stepping stone or building block, if you will, to realizing the potential that we have as a state. That being said, are there any questions that you may have or any comments that the Chancellor would like to make as well, or even Dr. Nygaard?
I would defer to the Godfather. I shared this with the Valley Prosperity Partnership last week. Satya Nadella is our CEO at Microsoft. He took Steve Ballmer's place, but Satya is very familiar with Fargo and our Fargo campus, Microsoft campus in Fargo. He led our Dynamics ERP R&D team from 2002 to 2007, then led our Dynamics organization as the executive VP in charge of the whole business group for 6 months until Steve and Bill asked him to go fix search. And he read in the New York Times about North Dakota being the Silicon Valley. And he sent an email to Doug Burgum and myself and just expressing that this is a great technology that Microsoft needs to get engaged in. We feel from a transactional standpoint, we have our Azure cloud service is just wildly successful in the cloud. It has a great machine learning component. AWS also has a good solution. They don't quite have the machine learning like we have. And when I say AWS, Amazon Web Services. But And Satya has he's got some staff people focused on biz dev, particularly around unmanned. And we had a conversation with that team, and they are very interested. They want to come to North Dakota, and I've connected with our 2 research vice presidents. They've been very helpful. They want to find out what kind of research is going on. Is there a chance for partnership? Is there synergy? They want to visit with BotLink, which is a very successful company right here in Fargo. But the opportunity is tremendous. And for Microsoft, the big win is to not have just a vendor relationship where you're buying solutions like Azure from us, but the bigger win is to have some type of cooperation. If there's areas of research where there's areas that we can cooperate on. So we're trying to do an inventory of the different research projects going on at UND and NDSU in particular, and those 2 universities, our 2 research universities. And it'll be interesting to see where all this goes, but we're really at the forefront, and this nexus the timing is just great. And but as you look down the road, we need all 11 campuses because we're going to have to train personnel. There's just going to be an opportunity for everybody, and working together does work. We can say this is mine and be good. We can say this is ours and be better. But working together not only brings out the best in all of us, it brings out the best in each of us, and we can sure move this whole thing forward by working together. So thanks for some great work and a lot of work ahead of us.
Thank you.
And I would just reiterate that we're working closely with the legislator. Senator Flacco has volunteered to be a liaison as well as Representative Striley, and I saw that Dr. Sanford had to leave, but one of our objectives is to put together some proposals that we can bring to them after it comes through here by June to talk with them, so this can eventually, even though we know money's tight, in the Great Depression, the people who built radio and radar changed the world, and so there's certain areas where we just have to keep moving forward and find partnerships with other colleges and whatnot. So, no other questions?
Continue, please.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And,
Thank you, Josh.
so I guess, thank you, Dr. Reedy, for your leadership on this and for all the leads of the pillars, and for the Godfather, thank you for what you've been doing here. All right, well, with that, we have the intellectual property update. So the first one, I guess, is, oh, sorry, Bach and you briefly. Well, to save time, I'll just say this. It's been a wonderful response by the 5 Western colleges. I think people heard already today, we had the first scholarship, and we had 30 applications, wonderful essays. The first scholarship is going to Dickinson, and already Minot has awarded scholarships, was in the paper. Bismarck has money, but because of its late time, the students didn't match up, but Bismarck now has scholarships from their foundation. Dickinson is working on their own scholarships, and I won't steal Dr. Nadolny's thunder, but he'll be rolling something out in a couple of days. So the outpouring to these workers and keeping people here has been wonderful, and as we saw in the brief, just getting their attention is first. There's so much money that the legislators provided, other scholarships that will be available once we get them there. Okay, with that, there's no other questions on Bach and you. Did you want to take a break? You want to keep plowing?
I propose we continue ahead.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Certainly. So I think Dr. Rush, you're first up on intellectual property.
Interesting configuration of the room. Madam Chair of the Board, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to take a few minutes to discuss intellectual property. And when asked to give a presentation intellectual property, I defined it rather liberally. So since I wasn't given concrete guidelines. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes, but one thing I would like to follow up on before I get started is to also say that on some of these topics that Josh mentioned, particularly on the UAV topic, particularly with Elbit. You know, NDSU is very excited for that research. We are the lead institution on that research project with Elbit through a Research North Dakota proposal. And so we're very excited to have that relationship and the potential it brings to the state. The one thing I want to caution on that, we do not have a contract in place yet. And there are many ITAR-related issues with bringing that UAV over to the United States, and FCC issues. And so I would put one point of caution out there in how much data and information we disseminate until we can work our legal counsel with their legal counsel and make sure we do not end up on the wrong side of any ITAR issues related to Israeli technology. But we are very excited to be a part of that research project as a lead institution. What I wanted to spend a few minutes on, a lot of times when people think of intellectual property, they think of developing a widget and getting out there in the commercial sector. And I just want to put a framework in place. You know, intellectual property, from that perspective, IP and patents, comes from a lot of different components of research, all the way starting with the fundamental discovery and basic research. And most of that is funded by our federal government. And universities actually perform 54% of all basic research in the country. And that's where your majority of your IP actually comes out of. And I know we focus on the latter part of, does this thing have a pointer? Does this thing have a, there it is. We focus on the latter part over here, which is the commercial R&D, and we're going to spend some time on that. But I want to, when we think of IP, we need to think of the whole entire discovery and innovation ecosystem. We live in a very knowledge and technology intensive economy, and it's only going to get worse. And so there is a great need to really understand how do we move forward in the research universities and how do we engage with that intellectual property. And so while I am going to talk about patents and what's happening on the NDSU campus, I want to take a broader look at IP, and it's more than just patents. And we need to look as universities, if we are going to move forward and we're going to make an impact into economic development, we need to look at it from a more holistic approach. So there is the patents and licensing, and that is what most people think about. But there's also the student side of it, and what engagements our students have for entrepreneurship, which then will transmit out with that knowledge into the workforce. There are, and the last three are really, how do we engage the corporate world? Because if we eventually want our IP out there for public good and consumption to drive the economy, a lot of it deals with the engagements of universities with the corporate world. And that's not just my office. It's not just a research office that actually does that. Certainly we have a big role in that. The Technology Transfer Office at NDSU is under my umbrella. The Corporate and Foundation Research Relations Office at NDSU is under my umbrella, and they are two main pillars of the corporate side dealing with research. But also when you look at it, we have to cultivate corporations across the spectrum. So that also incorporates bringing in, as we sit in the Alumni Center, the Foundation and Alumni Association. They're very big partners in this efforts with our companies. And the research and technology part, with the incubators and in the companies that exist there. And also at NDSU, we have a research foundation which actually protects the IP and does the patent work and licensing. And so none of this is done in a vacuum, and it must be done in a collaborative effort if we want to really engage companies for more than a one-off. Every university has a lot of one-offs with companies, and they're a lot of work. And so what we really want to go after is these long-term relationships, and how do we do that better as universities? So just to touch base on the patents, and for the new members on the board, you may recall in November 2014, the board passed the updates to policy 611.2, which is the IP policy. NDSU followed suit, updated our policy 190. And those policies, I'm not going to go through them, but they did try to bring them and make them more contemporary with what's happening in the country today. In terms of patents at NDSU, we've had 42 disclosures the last fiscal year. Our licensing revenue has hit an all-time high. We've exceeded $2.5 million in licensing revenue. And for a university of our size, that's extremely, extremely good. And if you look at the graph, you all have a handout, because I know this screen is hard to see. If you look at the green line, it's been steadily increased in our licensing revenue. And so we have been gaining speed on getting that intellectual property that has been protected out into the sector where it makes public good. But just to give you an idea of what our overall portfolio is, we hold 64 US and 17 foreign patents. These are non-ag, so this is technology type patents. That's what's in our portfolio. And we have licenses with 18 companies. Again, this is the non-ag side at this point. We have 7 startups that license. We have 7 faculty startups that license 8 different technologies on our campus. When you get to, since we are the land grant, when you get to our horticultural trademarks, that's how they do plants, and you get to the ag side, which is PVP, plant variety protection, you know, we have 34 US and 17 foreign trademarks for horticultural products, 58 US and 23 foreign certificates for plant varieties on the ag side. And then you look at the licensing out of that, we have 163 licenses for horticulture and 234 licenses for ag varieties. And so in terms of total IP, trademarks, certificates, PVP certificates, and actual patents, we have 213 in our current NDSU Research Foundation portfolio. In our licenses in collection, we have 415 different licenses that are active right now. And that's pretty impressive, but that's not enough. One of the complaints and one of the criticisms of university protection of IP is it sits on the shelf once we protect it, and it doesn't get out there for the public good to drive the economy. And so what else can we do as a university beyond the patent and trying to license in it? Patenting and licensing is always going to be a mainstay of what we do with IP. We want to make sure that the hard work of the students and the faculty is recognized and protecting their IP, but it's not going to be enough anymore. The world has changed in how we need to view and how we work with companies. So some of the things we've done in the last 2.3 years or so, we started with student IP. When I arrived, or before I arrived, I heard a lot of chatter from companies saying, we want to sponsor student projects, student senior design projects at NDSU. But the problem is NDSU won't allow us to have the IP. They keep it. So we've changed that. So beginning in the fall of 2014, for any senior capstone class, engineering would be a prime example, and that's the graph you have. The students have a choice. No longer does NDSU own that IP, the student owns the IP. They can choose to do with it what they want. They can keep it and try to patent it. They can assign it back over to the university, or they can assign it to a company that may be sponsoring their senior design project. And because we have put those processes in place, if you look at the last column, this is just from last fall and this spring in the College of Engineering. We have 20 projects that are corporately sponsored and that we have given the IP to the company. 2 years ago, that wouldn't exist because NDSU kept that IP and the companies walked away saying, we're not going to sponsor. And now we have students, undergrads, engaged with those companies because we were willing to say, you can have the IP. And we hope to gain the College of Engineering's goals to have 50% of their senior design projects corporately sponsored. So we're at about 30% right now, so they have a ways to go. But that door is open because we changed how we do practices. It has also allowed more student entrepreneurs. You may have seen in the January 13th edition of the Fargo Forum, we had an NDSU grad student named to the Forbes 30 under 30 list for manufacturing engineering. That's an NDSU student. He received his BS in industrial and manufacturing engineering in May of 2015. Now he's a grad student in mechanical engineering, and he's on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. That's pretty impressive for students, and it's their IP they developed, and their company has been created around that IP. One more thing on students, because it's a big part of our portfolio. NDSU also has an innovation challenge. It is administered for us through the Research and Tech Park, and What is shown on this graph, that we have 4 tracks: a product track, a service track, ag track, and a social entrepreneurial track. That's our newest track. And there's a lot of companies and entities that want to sponsor social entrepreneurship. And that's great, because if you think of our young adults today, a lot of them are geared in that direction. And what you see are the ones that have moved on. And there will be an award ceremony on March 1st, and the winners will be picked from these student groups that have developed names for their little projects or companies. But this is all student entrepreneurship. They are engaged not only with the tech park, but with the emerging prairie startup community in Fargo. And this is all coming off of a university campus in North Dakota. So away from patents and looking at, again, moving towards better relationships and better engagement with our companies. Another thing I heard when I arrived, and I heard it loud and clear, and let me put a caveat. Every university hears this from companies. It's not a North Dakota problem. It's not an NDSU problem. It's not a UND problem. It's a every university in the country problem when it comes to working with companies. And companies oftentimes will say universities are hard to work with. Part of that is true and part of it's not. Part of it's education and part of it's understanding the culture of the company and the company understanding the culture of the university. You know, a lot of it is engagement and dialogue. However, having said that, we certainly took a look at how we try to engage companies, particularly on the contracting side. You know, if someone handed me a 40-page contract, I probably wouldn't want to read it either. So our industrial research contract actually has never been 40 pages. It's been 5 pages. And, but we took a look at our industrial contract and how could we tweak it and update it to make it more business friendly. But with that 5-page industrial sponsored research contract, we tried to apply it to everything. And half the time it didn't make sense. And so with that, we've created some other templates. We've created testing service agreement templates. We've created terms and conditions for our service centers. Before that, there was this 8-9-page document that had about 8-point font to it that you could barely read. And again, as a company, I would never want to read that. And the other thing we did, and we're about to launch, and that's that kind of table thing on the bottom, is our express contract, 1 page. You want to sponsor research on our campus today? We can do it in a day, and it's a 1-page contract. Now, NDSU keeps all the IP to that, but we'll sign a contract in a day, 1 page. And that one's about to be launched. Again, we're trying to make that process, we're trying to streamline that process to reduce the amount of time we spend negotiating. Frustration builds when the negotiation goes on and goes on and goes on. And so we're trying to reduce that, and we're mindful of that. Everybody's time is valuable. I'm almost finished. We are, like every other university, we do traditional patent license models. Traditional patent license models are always going to be a majority of the portfolio. The IP is licensed after it is created, after it is protected. That's standard. And then a company comes to the table and tries to negotiate licensing. But we are looking for other methods to, again, provide flexibility to the companies. We're not looking to create a new wheel. There are plenty of states out there that are years ahead on this pathway. And so we are looking at Minnesota, and we're looking at Iowa. Minnesota has the MNIP. They have the create and they have the try and buy on their technology. A company can come in and pretty much do a trial run on technology before they decide to license it at little to no cost. And then Iowa State has some models for contracting, a ready-to-sign model and an ownership assigned to sponsor model. In that ready-to-sign model, if a company sponsors research, they pay the full burden of that research, plus they pay an extra 10% upfront on top for an option to negotiate IP that may come out of it. The ownership assigned to sponsor, they'll assign up front. They'll turn that ownership of any IP over to the sponsor. IP that's not even been created yet. The company, what the company has to do up front, they pay the full burden of the research, including the fully burdened F&A, and then they pay another 75% on top of that. And with that 75%, they say, here you go, any IP created is yours. Of course, all these have bonanza clauses in them, so if the next Google is created, after about $20 million in revenue, the university would get a 1% royalty. But we're looking at these models, and we're looking at them because there will be some cases where a company might want to do this. And if this type of licensing is preventing a company from doing business with us, well, then we need to take a look at it. But they're going to be far and few between in the traditional license. But we now are looking to provide the flexibility of companies to say, what do you want to do? All right. And then lastly, to the last few slides, is better corporate engagement. How do we get better at engaging with the companies, and how do they get better understanding what we do? We are about to roll out, it should roll out pretty soon. We use Pivot on our campus. That is a database where researchers can go in and find other researchers. They get emails saying, here, this RFP is sitting out here. So it's internal to the university. Well, Pivot Gallery is almost a GUI interface that comes on top of it, and through sponsorship with the Research and Tech Park, we have added or superimposed Pivot Gallery on top of our Pivot system. And now you in the private sector can go into Pivot Gallery. It's open to the public. You can say, hey, I would click on that and show you, but I'm afraid I'll screw up the whole presentation, so I won't do that. You can go in and say, do we have researchers at NDSU that do research on biocomposites? You type in the word biocomposites, and every researcher on campus will come up. And you have their contact information, you have their research areas, you have everything. And so now we are about to take that public, and it provides this front door for companies to say, do you have someone on campus that can help me? Right. Along that same front, we sent out, 2 weeks ago, we sent out a survey to campus. And that's just some shots of that survey, to ask everybody on campus, do you already engage with companies? Do you have a company contact? Do you have a technical contact at a company? We want to know. And how are you engaging them? If you go back to what I said earlier, we need to cultivate companies across the spectrum. So you can check whatever box you want. It could be a philanthropic connection. It could be a research connection. It could be a student scholarship connection. And so actually, the Foundation Alumni Association will get access to all this data also when we have it populated. But again, trying to understand what we already have on our campus and how are we engaging our companies, because you want to engage them in more than one front. And then just to finish up, my last slide, in terms of engaging companies, when I was here in December, in the union, I used PPG as an example of a company that we have been cultivating over the long term. And I want to come back to that example, not to discuss what I did in December, but to say that not only are we engaged with PPG from a research perspective, PPG is also one of the sponsors of our Innovation Challenge through the PPG Foundation. And so now we have tentacles into PPG just beyond the research. They are now sponsoring those students that I showed for the Innovation Challenge. And I do want to highlight, as I said, we do have currently 65 corporate partners, and we've had 296 different partners from 2001 to 2015. And I want to finish today with I added this table on the bottom and talk a little bit about the Research North Dakota Venture Grant Program. We've had 26 awards through that program. It's a very valuable state funding program for us, 9 Research North ND and 17 venture grants. The venture grants, for those that you're not aware, those are the ones, phase 1 and then phase 2, where faculty are say, okay, I'm about ready with my technology, but I need a little bit more investment to get that technology ready for prime time. So our faculty, our entrepreneurial faculty, have taken great advantage of the venture fund, and that is the fund that keeps running out of money, unfortunately. And what I want to highlight, not so much are the dollars, but the last column, those state funds, which are on the applied side, which are on the commercial R&D side, have enabled 42 students to be involved. So again, if you go back to the students and you go back to the educational success and gaining skills outside of the classroom, that state funding which is valuable to push our technology down the road for patents and then for companies to start around it, has allowed us to engage 42 students who are learning valuable skill sets. And so I want to leave this thought with the board. When we think about IP, we think about that patent, and that's how we transfer it. But intellectual property is transferred in many forms from a campus. And knowledge from the students that graduate is the largest form of transfer we do, actually. That is our largest form of intellectual knowledge transfer that we can have. Those students graduate, they take that knowledge into the public and private sector, into the companies they work for. And that's actually the largest transfer we do. It's not the licensing of patents. And with that, I will end.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Dr. Rush. Are there any questions or comments? If not, we'll move ahead. Oh, excuse me.
Just a comment. I want to commend Kelly, Dr. Rush, and NDSU on your guys' work to continue to move down this path of how do you unleash innovation and entrepreneurialism that occurs on campus and commercialize those efforts. And it's important to remove kind of the shackles and to think of how do we become more competitive in this space with our partners, our faculty, and our students, because this is a very competitive space, as we found out in our search. And beyond that, I'm pretty familiar with some of the commercialization efforts in higher education. And everybody's doing it. And so we have to maintain and keep pushing the envelope and stay on that edge. So nice work.
Thank you very much.
As somebody's had some discussions previously, years ago,
Yep.
I think it's a huge move forward. And when we had discussions with NDSU around some crop IP, it was very difficult to navigate. It was a very difficult process. So I think streamlining and understanding that you're working with the companies becomes so important is really a tremendous move forward, and I think that's great. My one question was on the revenue side. Is the bulk of it out of the PVPs and the licensing on the ag side at this point?
A good majority, yes.
Okay.
And that's, and let me explain what happens there with PVP, the plant variety, and how it's different from a widget. When IP comes through the door, or this invention disclosure form comes to the technology transfer office for a widget, usually it's very early stage, and you get it protected. And it's going to take the next 8 to 10 years to get it market ready so it can be licensed. Plant varieties come to the door ready to go to market because that investment is already taking place the 8 to 10 years, right, through the agriculture experiment station and in their work in the plant varieties, in the breeding and putting them out in the trial plots. So both take the time. It's when it comes through the door. And so there's some misconception that it takes too long for technology, but we have to realize they both take 8 to 10 years or whatever. It's just when that investment takes place, when it's protected. So
get the fruit's on the vine on the horticultural side when it comes to your office is the key thing.
Yes, and for the widget, you have the idea in your head, and it's going to take the next 8 to 10 years.
And that patience, I think, is something that we need to have, especially on the technology and other on the patent side. It takes the time for that to become mature and become commercially viable. And our time will come. Patience is key.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, UND, Dr. McGimsey, please.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Chancellor Hagerott. Appreciate the chance to come and tell you a little bit about IP at the University of North Dakota. And I hope that the font is large enough there. But basically, what I'd like to talk about is kind of the philosophy of IP that we've had at the university and are developing further, and how that philosophy is reflected in the practices that we have around IP now and what we'll have going around IP in the future. So just to step back, the idea of intellectual property is a pretty old one. I think Kelly had a slide on that said Abe Lincoln was a patent holder. It goes back further than that. I think we're closing in somewhere around 9 million patents just in the U.S., probably have another several 100,000 in some kind of process towards being issued. So it's a lot of intellectual property. The idea of university intellectual property is a little bit newer. Back in the 70s, the federal government, which was funding a lot of research, was actually keeping all of the intellectual property. They were patenting it and basically putting it on the shelf, and they had realized that they were really only exposing about 5% of their patents to the commercial world, and so they decided that they would ask the universities to do what the federal government hadn't been able to do. So the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980 really empowered universities to develop the IP, take title to the IP, but then there was several requirements that the Act placed on universities about what they should do with that IP. And the most important thing was that they were supposed to try and get it out into the commercial sector. So universities were charged with licensing IP to companies, particularly small companies. So the idea was to try and empower startup companies and other small companies with the intellectual property that had been developed at the university by federal funding. So essentially, it placed an economic development responsibility on universities. If we wanted to take title to that IP, we had to do something with it. So I've been in the IP game a long time, 15 years as inventor, had a couple of startup companies, also on the administrative side, and I can tell you that it's extremely challenging to commercialize technology from a university. And one of the main reasons for that is that the dollars that come into the university to do the research that ends up creating the intellectual property is not really linked to a commercial outcome. So the NIH or other federal agencies, they want problems solved with the research that they're funding. They're not necessarily particularly concerned with getting some kind of commercialization event at the end of that. And so there's a mismatch between the funding that comes in, the expectations of the funding agencies, and the expectations of the Bayh-Dole Act. And that's really kind of where universities struggle. Effectively, we create IP that nobody wants. And that's a huge generalization, but we're in the position as universities when we take federal funding, when we create IP with that federal funding, we're not really listening to the customer who will be the eventual user of that IP or the technology that we create. So we're kind of in a market push situation. We're trying to be out there and selling the IP to people essentially who may or may not want that IP. And what I'm going to talk about just in a couple minutes, and it's kind of a newer approach that I found to be successful at my last institution, we really want to develop a market pull. So we want to develop relationships with companies and industry. We want to work with industry to develop IP that's meaningful for them, and in that way, basically make it easier for us to sell the IP once we've created it. When I came about 4.5 months ago and looked at the IP operation at UND, it was essentially a best practice at most universities. We were receiving disclosures for inventions from faculty. We were going out and actively mining in the faculty for disclosures. We were subjecting those to a technology validation to make sure that they could be reduced to practice, which is a requirement for patenting. And we were also doing, I think, a pretty thorough marketing job, or market validation job. We were looking at whether the ideas and the disclosures that were coming to us and that we were considering patenting, we're looking to see whether there was a potential market for the technology, for the intellectual property. And not only that, what we were trying to do was build clusters of IP around areas that we thought were of potential market value. But all of those activities are still very reactive. And so we kind of wait for faculty, we wait for funding to come in, we wait for faculty to do research, we wait for them to report that research to us in terms of a disclosure of an invention. And what we really want to do is be more proactive. So we want to be able to engage with the eventual users of the technology before we've actually done the research. So we've come up with what I'm calling kind of an expanded IP strategy at the university, and it revolves around corporate engagement. And Kelly has already mentioned corporate engagement. I think most universities, us included, realize that we need to have partnerships with companies in order to be doing the research that's meaningful for those companies and ultimately for our economy and for our livelihoods. So what we've done in order to kind of kickstart this corporate engagement, I've formed a 4-person corporate engagement team. I'm a member of that team, and our job is to go out and talk to companies, find out what company needs are, what their problems are, what their challenges are, what their short-term strategies are, what their long-term strategies are, what are their pain points. And then our job as a team is to come back to the university and identify the resources, the brain power of our faculty and our students, the facilities that we have, the resources that we have internal, and apply those to the things that we've learned about the company needs. And if we do that, what we're going to end up doing is co-developing intellectual property that has a market, basically that has a demonstrated need. We'll be working with companies that are telling us what it is that they want. Along with that, and this kind of applies more to smaller companies and startups, the University of North Dakota has a lot of assets that are kind of directed towards economic development. So the idea is that we've created spaces. We have incubation space, acceleration space. We have services. We have a Center for Innovation. We have a Center for, or a School of Entrepreneurship. We have all of these assets. And what we started doing in this team is, first of all, inventorying what those assets are so that we know what we have, but also coordinating them so that we can actually publicize those to industry, to the private sector, so they know what it is that they can tap into. When at my previous institution, this was a couple of years ago, I was on a year-long Board of Regents commercialization task force, and what we heard over and over again from companies is that it was very difficult for a company to figure out where they could get help within a university. So there aren't a lot of really easily navigable portals that companies can use in order to find out what a university can do or what faculty can do for them. And I guess, related to this, and the message that I want to get across to the private sector is that the university is both open for business and open to business. I mean, it might sound a little bit trite, but what I want to convey is that the university and our assets, we want to be involved in solving industrial problems. We want to be working with companies closely. And at the same time, we want to be open to business coming to us and asking us for help. And so essentially, we want a much closer relationship with the private sector. Certainly, that's not going to be the only driver of creating intellectual property, but for me, it makes sense. We're making, by doing this, we're creating intellectual property that has a need, a demonstrated need that people are telling us that they want. So, part of this, again, I guess more or less to talk about the nuts and the bolts. Our corporate engagement effort, we're hoping, will lead companies to the university. And Kelly already mentioned this. Once they get there, they have to know where to go. They need to know who to talk to. And then we need to provide some very easy ways for companies to start working with the university. So we need to make it easy to negotiate sponsored research agreements or intellectual property agreements. We need to streamline that process, and that is also underway at UND. Another maybe philosophy change here is we're not going to be requesting or demanding issuance fees for licenses, particularly from small companies. Small companies don't have any cash. Their startups are always looking for cash rather than having money in their pockets to pay for issuance fees. We don't want to impede the progress of company development. What we would like to do is help a company be successful and then ultimately share in that success. And that's kind of the home run policy that a number of institutions around the country have been adopting. I think it's something that we need to do as well. And then finally, maybe a more philosophical point, what's the value of IP to the university? And I really believe strongly that the value of IP to the university should be the same as the value of IP to the state. And frankly, I don't really see I don't really believe that universities should be doing IP, creating IP to make money, because there are so few examples of universities actually making money from IP. Our goal in creating IP is to drive economic development. Our goal is, in creating IP, is to show that we're relevant to the citizens of North Dakota and to the industry in North Dakota, that we're an important part of the economic development landscape in the state. That's our goal. Certainly, there are advantages that accrue to the university. If we solve industry problems, the industry will be back, and they'll be asking us to solve more problems, and we'll be able to continue to do research by having that relationship. I just want to say one thing also. I mean, I'm really impressed with Kelly's description of student entrepreneurship, student-run businesses, student initiated businesses. That's something that we're also planning to do at UND to increase the amount of student involvement in innovation and entrepreneurship. We are creating a research innovation commercialization hub, which will be an IP-free zone for students. We'll be putting facilities and resources and mentorship and advice into that hub to let students kind of work on their ideas, develop their ideas to the point where perhaps there's a business idea or some potential commercializable product that comes out of it, and then helping them further after that. So I think that's the last slide that I have. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Dr. McGimsey, thank you very much. Any questions from the board, comments? Like that, we'll say thank you.
Thanks very much.
Appreciate your time. You bet. At this point, it's 3:16. I think it's a 5-minute break would be in order. How about we'll reconvene here at 3:20? Thank you. Thank you. This would help if we had our chairs.
President Schaefer, sure, you sit down, everybody else. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much. I think for the concept of time, we will continue moving along here. We'll move on to board business. Number 5, approve NDUS Foundation membership. And with that, the Chancellor, address it?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I would just want to thank the board members for their support on an initiative that actually isn't new. This has been around for 23 years. I think it might have been built when Governor Schaefer was here. Who knows, he might have had a hand in it. But all we're doing is basically manning up, if you want to call it a mothballed ship, so to speak. And I just want to thank the volunteers. And Dr. Scogan volunteered to be and was actually voted in by his peers to be the representative for Bismarck State College. Mr. John Backus, some of you might have served with him. He was a leader in higher ed here a couple years ago. Mike Warner built companies and is quite a figure here in Fargo, volunteered immediately upon even me talking to him about it, says I'm in. And then Senator Oban and Cynthia Schreiber-Beck, Representative Beck, are you here? You were here. Thank you again for your service. And mostly I want to thank Dr. Melliker because he has already been thinking on this. And so what we'll do here is make a motion to approve these members, and then Dawn will, because of all the things you're doing, volunteer to step down, at which point then Kevin will abstain, and the rest of you then can vote whether you want to have him replace Dawn as the co-chair who will carry most of the lifting. And for audience members here who don't understand the foundation, this is not to compete with the existing foundations. This is to fill gaps in the integration of our system, which again the visionaries back in 1993, 92 had. And already there's been several good suggestions like Bach and you, a system-wide or subsystem scholarship. This board could help with that. This initiative, this nexus, maybe joint appointments or collaborative scholarship across 2 campuses. In the humanities, I already spoke with the head of the North Dakota Council of Humanities. There used to be a system-wide scholarship that went to the best poet or the best historian in the state that the legislature used to fund. They'd used to come together and join up. This could be something this foundation could do, or even something like the 23rd of May, when we're going to have this offsite. Who pays for this? Where does this come from? The foundation someone could sponsor that. Again, system-wide stuff does not compete with the existing ones. We're not creating something new. We're just manning it back up. And Dr. Melliker, do you want to say anything?
$120 million. And so we were able to do lots of things, from matching funds, we were able to set up family funds, all kinds of different things. One of the things that I got out of that, being on that board, is that there's a couple of fact sheets that talk about foundations, and especially foundations in the state of North Dakota. And I'll just read a couple of quick comments about that. The transfer of wealth by North Dakota families from 2007 to 2061 presents unprecedented opportunities to create a spectacular future for the people of this region and beyond. And I agree with Dr. Hagerut. Initially, I heard some comments about how we are actually being competitive with the various college and university foundations, which is totally not the truth. What we are trying to do is work collaboratively with them to grow the amount of funds that will go into higher education in North Dakota, because we all are going to find people that want to give to the university system, people that want to give to NDSU, people that want to give to Devil's Lake, Mayville, and so on. The other
takeaway from this was that the potential for charitable contributions in North Dakota is about 20% greater per household than in the rest of the country. So we have a huge bucket out there to try to get people involved with higher education. And just to see how awake everyone was earlier, I heard a comment from one of my colleagues that said, "Say mine be good, say ours be better." So for a cup of coffee, who said that? There you go. And that's exactly what we are trying to do here. So, anyway.
Kevin, I'm convinced that would propose a motion. I move that I be moved off the foundation board and be moved on. To approve the other.
And lawyers, correct if we're doing anything wrong here. I guess just one vote to approve these trustees as written with Don being replaced by Kevin Melliker. That's fine. That's fine? Okay.
Mr. Melliker, did you have more comments that you wanted to?
No, that was it.
That was
Yes,
it?
that
Okay,
was it.
thank you.
Thank
Do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stemmen. Any further discussion on this?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to ask a quick question. Have the other foundations been consulted as life is going to be breathed into this foundation that's been stagnant for a number of years? I'm just wondering if they've been communicated with. I think it's very important as you start to move down the road of kind of breathing life back into this and make sure that communication happens. We're about a system here, and we want to make sure we're getting along with our counterparts.
We're actually just starting it, and we need 7 members to take any action and to talk about things during the initial foundation meeting. My thought process is to include them in the tent immediately, because they are a very valuable part, again, of our colleges and universities, and this is a wonderful opportunity for all of us to work together. And so that's very critical, very important. So after we have our first meeting, and we talk about this among the people that are on the committee, and make some decisions, then we will include them and visit with them about that. I have visited with one about it, yes.
Member Hacker, we also, unfortunately, Linda's not here. If you notice, Linda had major surgery on one of her limbs, and she's recovering rapidly, but couldn't be here. We started in the summer to integrate all the foundations in a collaborative discussion group on how we can team together. And that's something she's tried to do herself with her staff and me. And this could be a wonderful function that this foundation could do, is help, when you find common ground, things you want to do together to facilitate, but not to compete against, but to facilitate. So we've already had some initial discussions on how we can better work together. And I would propose that that's something maybe we, hand off from Linda, at least, or work together on that. So that's a major part of this, is just getting together and talk about common interests, which Larry Robinson was the one who actually suggested we start having those conversations.
Thank you, Chancellor. Any other questions? I guess my question is, I agree with the mission, the vision of this. I think it's great to resurrect it. Are there any funds in it at this point?
We just did an audit the other day. We have $66.
Better than $66 in the red.
So we do have a ways to go, and but we have a million ideas.
There you go. And
So
they are valuable.
with the ideas that we have and with the meetings that we have hopefully coming up, we can grow that. We certainly need some funds to get us started. We need some funds to work, just simple things, correspondence, brochures, things such as that, and mainly need to get around and talk to people about it.
Good. Well, that is, that million ideas are what I think we just learned about intellectual property, and we have the expert here, Dr. Rush, in the room, so you may want to consult her to capitalize upon that. Sure. There you go. Thank you. All righty. Item number, let's see, we had a, motion and second and discussion. Is there any further discussion on the NDUS Foundation membership? Hearing none, Christy?
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yeah.
Dr. Meliker? Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert? Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Item number 6, approve President Emeritus status. And I believe, Richard, I'll defer to you for this.
Yes, we've had a request from UND to provide emeritus status to both President Kelly and First Lady Kelly. State board policy allows for emeritus status to be granted with approval of the state board. With emeritus status, the individuals are able to maintain their affiliation with the institution. They do not draw pay or get any financial benefit from that. They also, depending on institutional policy, it varies, but usually retain the right to use letterhead, business cards, other items like that. UND has indicated that they feel that President Kelly and First Lady Kelly's long service in leadership roles and also as educators more than makes them eligible for emeritus status.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on this?
I think it's a good idea. Marcia was just a great advocate for the University of North Dakota, just like President Schaefer's wife will be, Nancy will.
Chancellor, do you have any insight on this item?
No, I think they did wonderful work, and I just, to note, I was the ex officio member at the UND search, and the search firm informed me that Dr. Kelly, his wife, are glad to be a resource for whoever applies, to talk to, as you know, hiring a spouse as well, and I thought that was incredibly generous on them, because I know they have an ailing mother-in-law, and so they continue to support the school even in that capacity.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, I would move that Dr. Kelly and his wife, Marcia, be named President Emeritus for the University of North Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Hacker. Second? Second. Thanks, Ms. Milliker. Christie?
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you, and congratulations to the Kellys. They have done a wonderful job for UND and for the system. Item number 7, approve State Board of Higher Ed meeting changes in your board documents on your agenda. May 26th has been moved to May 23rd and 24th, 2016. And the July 27th and 28th retreat to June, the exact date and location to be determined. Are there any questions on those changes?
The 23rd and 20, sorry, I'm probably supposed to know. Is it all day, the 23rd and 24th, May?
Chancellor?
The 23rd would be when all the stakeholders would be there, and the governor's indicated that he would like to join us. And the 24th would be the typical state board meeting in the morning. I think we then get you on the road, Madam Chairman, to your Williston oil conference by noon, I think, that day, or something like that.
Yeah,
Something
that
around-
is the Williston Basin
Right.
Petroleum Conference, but that's right there at the Civic Center in Bismarck.
Right, so
I-
a very short road ride.
A very short road ride, but one I am fully committed to
Right.
doing. So yes, we will be done noon on the 24th.
Just a comment, Madam Chair, the earlier we can set these meetings is really extremely important, I'm sure for other members, but I arrange certain travel arrangements and commitments that cost me financially individually, because I plan on our schedule, and I'm usually about 6 months out. So the sooner we can really nail down these July dates as well is going to be important. And I know, and then it's always a little extra challenge when we move. So I will attempt to be there on the 23rd. It's questionable, but I will be there on the 24th.
I hear you loud and clear. Any other comments, Mr. Johnson? Same thing? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I would have one comment.
Yes, Ms. Reichert?
In addition to that, I've struggled with, I've always, counted on the third or fourth Thursday of every month, and I'm playing double duty today. And I understand the legislative committee was meeting today, so I think that's important. and I know all of us have these things that we're trying to juggle. The other request I would make is that before we engage or schedule a meeting that involves other people, that we check with board members first to make sure it works with their calendars, because I'm in the same position. The May and dates are probably doubtful, and depending on what comes up in June, that is likely doubtful as well.
Well said.
I would recommend that anybody I would let Christie know, she can take a look at some dates and try to work. And if you have to miss a meeting, it's not the end of the world. We will adjust.
Thank you.
And I'll miss some too. We all will. Pardon?
I had to miss because of our changing schedules and March on a Tuesday, I'll miss that. I mean, I feel like I'm starting to feel like I can't.
But when you hear you make up for 4 or 5.
Madam Chairman?
Yes.
If I could just, believe me, we are trying, same with me, to have schedules. What's driving these movements in June, July is this budget event that we realized the dates we would have set would have us having a retreat after we already inputted the governor's budget. And so the idea of that June offsite will allow you to have had 2 weeks for us to absorb what stakeholders said as late as we could in May to get a sense of what's happening in the priorities. Then we can meet, have a retreat, and then we can get Tammy's stuff into the budget, because this time the budget's going to be different. If you remember, we're doing the IBARs with all this fidelity, and so there'll probably be some heavy lifting in that June meeting for you all to buy in, because it's going to be line by line. So I appreciate that, and that, we hadn't probably thought early enough, like, wow, this budget's going to tighten, and we need you to all be engaged in the budget decisions. Whereas in the past, we could probably send more stuff forward in general categories, but now it's going to be very different. So again, it's all been driven by different reasons, trying to juggle these things, and particularly to have you have a chance in June, July to engage substantively on what's going to set the budget for the year, the next biennium.
Since we're talking meeting dates, on March 15th, Nick, which is when we're going to interview the final candidates for UND, will we have a meeting on the 14th or on the 16th, or will that be just a one-day meeting?
Good question.
Depends on how many candidates they move forward, I would think. How many interviews you have to do on that day.
I'm sorry, Chrissy?
The search committee, how many candidates they move forward? I'm not sure if anyone has that number yet.
Okay.
That number has not been determined. No. It's recommended 3 to 4?
3 to 4.
3 to 4. We have 7 candidates identified for campus visits. So you're right, the number of candidates will impact how long the 15th takes as well.
I strongly, Madam Chair, I strongly expect there'll be 4, because we don't want to have what happened before, that then someone drops out, we're down to 2. So, and then if all 4 accept.
Do you know by chance if the meeting dates will be the 15th, 16th then, or the 14th, 15th?
The plan is to hopefully get it in one day.
One day? Okay.
I agree with you. These are, and I will, just an idea was brought up. Is there any appetite at all to do 2-day meetings beginning on a weekend day? Some of us work in the oil field, and weekends don't really amount to anything. So, I can't say it's a problem for me, but it's just a thought.
Madam Chair, I'm okay with like Friday, Saturday, or Sunday,
Friday,
Monday.
Saturday, or Sunday, Monday, something like that. Any other thoughts?
Are you thinking around the retreats?
I'm thinking the
especially?
retreat time, actually. Boy, I'll tell you, weekdays are, they're hard to do all this in.
Same goes,
Same for
at least
you?
for me. Healthcare doesn't really wait on weekends either. People still get sick, so
Regardless.
the earlier we get these pegged down, even on those weekends, would be important for June dates or whenever.
How about Christie will work on our schedule for us and then get back to each of us? Probably the most efficient way would be an email out to all of us with potential dates, and as quickly as we can get back to her, we can get these meetings set. All righty, thank you. All right, moving on. Any other questions on scheduling or input, ideas, being creative? Moving on, we'll go to item number 8 is the State Board of Higher Ed Budget, Finance, and Facilities Committee report. Mr. Morton.
I thought it was all part of the consent agenda.
Before we break them down, you do the budget and finance. There's 2 items.
Would you just like to summarize the items that we're going to?
The main item was, if I remember correctly, was approving the hardware for
Here, give them that.
Bismarck State.
Items number 8 and number 9, we were going to handle together as coming from Budget, Finance, and Facilities.
Would it be 8 through 16?
Pardon me?
Would it be 8 through 16?
Well, actually, there was reason to break these down and have
right.
comments or the opportunity for comments from other individuals.
Madam Chair, while Don is working through his thoughts, because I know there's a million things on your mind, just so you know, Tammy, the staff, working with the campuses, we're looking at all these things coming through with the mind to the allotment, because these pools of money will be reduced. So just so you know, we're watching that if one school is getting close to its full amount, yet there's not enough left for the allotment. So it's not just, if you look at just pro forma, they've been looking at this stuff, Tammy's staff's looking at it, the different campuses, but I don't think there needs to be a lot of discussion here, but that's been taken into consideration.
Items 8 and 9 we're taking at this point. Just items 8 and 9 at this point on your agenda. If we can, if your motion would be to approve consent agenda on those items, do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Christie?
Dr. Melliker? Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. Just for clarity, now what we'll do is we'll take items 10 through 16 as as a second bundle of consent items. But before we go through that, I'd like to call on either Tammy. Do you have any comments or additional information for us?
Well, one, Tammy, while you're thinking on it, if you look at this and it seems, oh gee, there's $1 million for lighting, that has a safety implication, okay? So that's from NDSU, the music theater lighting. It's not just making the lights glow better. Again, all the campuses are looking at everything, they're sending stuff forward. But again, Tammy, what else might you have?
Madam Chairman, members of the board, I really don't have any other information on these projects at all. They've been evaluated by the campuses through our office. There's funding for them, and they've determined that they're necessary.
And they've also already gone through committee?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Hearing that, is there a motion to approve items 10 through 16?
I'll move approval of 10 through
Thank
16.
you, Mr. Johnson. Second? Thanks, Mr. Melliker. Christie?
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Moving along, we are on to State Board of Higher Ed Academic and Student Affairs Committee consent items, and this, I would like to bundle items 17 through 27, and call on Ms. Reichert
Thank you.
to review for us.
Yeah, so you can see that our committee met and recommended approval of the new programs there, 17 through 21. I just point out in particular the petroleum engineering degrees on item 21, as it's a timely topic and a responsive program. We also have the termination of some programs that might not. We discussed that in depth, and it sounds like enrollments are just, we don't have the enrollments in those programs. And so after that discussion, we also recommended approval of that. Have some organizational changes that I believe are largely name changes, items 23 through 26. We also had number 27, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, is a 10-year request for I believe it's a dean at UND who, when she joined, we probably should have awarded tenure. And I think, and I apologize because this is out of cycle. We like to do these all at once. This one was, we think, just overlooked. And after running through her credentials, we all were very confident she certainly met the requirements and recommended approval of that as well. Just a couple other notes on the discussions that we had to update the rest of you. We did talk about the core course requirements and reviewing that and working on a task force. And Richard and Mike are working on that. It sounds like Richard's, we've identified some of the people, and Richard's begun putting that group together, and we will start to take a look. I think that came up at the last meeting. We also talked at length about an issue with the use of special appointments for for faculty members, and Dr. Murphy expressed some concern over how we're using special appointments versus other appointments, and whether or not those individuals have the rights under our procedures to grieve various things. And so that was something that we talked a lot about, and our takeaway from that is that we will, I think, dig in a little deeper and determine what the issues are, what the questions are, and what recommendations we may want to make, potentially changing our procedures on that topic. Also, just a real quick, item 31 we talked about as well. I know that's not on the consent agenda, but we did talk about that policy, and it's just a simple wording change that we also recommended to approve, or at least discussed. So our committee would recommend approval of items 17 through 27.
Well, thank you, Ms. Stryker, and thanks for the work of all the committees and the time that's involved. And who else is on the committee with you?
It's Dr. Murphy, Mr. Johnson, me, and Mr. Ness.
Thanks. All right. Dr. Murphy?
Yes, if I could, I'd like to actually ask if item number 25, if that name change could take place as soon as possible. And the reason is there's a fair number of people. The name was never a good name choice to begin with, and as we send NIH grants in, it would be ideal to put legitimately and legally the Department of Biomedical Sciences rather than the Department of Basic Sciences. And if we could, I guess I'm asking if the state board could make that immediately so we could, for the February 5th deadline, be able to put that name on, that'd be great.
Thank you for your input there. I would say
The lawyers, once they vote, it's done, correct?
As far as the board's action is approval, and then it's up to the university to implement. Then we will recommend a speedy implementation. Thank you. With that, we'll ask for let's see, do we have a motion? We need a motion to approve consent items numbers 17 through 27.
I will move the consent items 17 through 27 with the chair's recommendation that number 25 be speedy.
Second that motion.
Thank you. Christie?
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Martin? Yes. Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. All righty, we'll go on item 29. This is merely an update from the Audit Committee, of which I'm the chair, and Mr. Meliker and Mr. Steeman are participants or members of that. Audit met on January 15th. We interviewed the candidates for University System Compliance person and Director of Audit Services. Then we went into, we gave a full recommendation to the board to hire Carol Reedman for compliance and Laura Ann Schratt as audit services. The board then held a special meeting on January 19th, unanimously voted yes to hire both individuals. We would like to congratulate both Carol Reedman and Laura Ann and look forward to working with them. I'd like to ask Lisa if you can give us an update on details about these two positions.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Carol Redmond has agreed to be our new NDUS compliance officer, and she begins her duties on March 1st. Laura Schratt has already started. She began February 1st, and she's transitioning from her current duties now into the Director of Audit Services. They'll be located in the Capitol, but not in the same area as the system office, which is on the 10th floor. They will be located in the judicial wing, so it's an arm's length away from the system office, giving them the distance requested by the board, not being in the same area as the rest of the system office employees. So we're very excited to have them on board.
And just for clarification, they report to the Audit Committee, is that correct?
Yes.
Just so we have some arm's length between their work and the University System Office.
That is correct, yes.
Any questions, comments? Yes, Chancellor?
And I just want to thank Dr. Feldner and Tammy Dolan and Pam Sharp that they gave us the space, actually, which is going to save even more money. So we're moving these people from the Horizon Building into the Capitol. So people are helping us where we can, which is effectively a 17% budget cut we're working with. So to all my staff, I want to keep thanking them for doing sometimes triple duty.
Excellent, thank you. Moving ahead, board policy readings. I find these very important that we take the time to understand. I will take consent, look for consent on items number 30 and 31. And Lisa, can you share some information on this for us?
The first one, HR 13, is the employment of relatives, and this is just cleaning up this HR policy to align with Century Code. So you will see in the draft that it's defining the Century Code references at the bottom of the page, and so you can see in 13.2.1 that they are just aligning the language with a state Century Code. Pretty simple.
All right. With that, we'll need a motion to approve.
Chair
Excuse me.
Nesset?
Yes.
At the last meeting, I asked the question in reference to the tuition waiver policy, and I'll ask it with this one. When we refer to spouse, are we being consistent in our policies that that's using the ND PERS definition?
Excuse me. Which item are you on, Ms. Tucker?
The employment of relatives.
Employment of relatives, item 30?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we could defer to our attorneys to answer the question. Item 30, the question was regarding the definition of a spouse. Is that correct, Ms. Tufty? And are we being consistent across the system?
Right, but in 820, somebody said it was changed, and it really wasn't changed. Now, I think it's changed. But this is important from a CCF perspective as well.
You bet. It is. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thanks for that clarity, Ms. Tufty. Appreciate it. At this point, we'll look for a motion to approve the first reading, items 30 and 31. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Christie?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Morton?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Dr. Melliker?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Items 32, 33, and 34. Mr. Nick Vaughn, are you able to share some information on this with us?
I'll just introduce
Thank you.
those three. We became aware of the declining revenue forecast last fall, and as a result, the president's requested that we look at these HR policies to give them more flexibility. And so while we looked at them, we also did some cleanup, and Nick will talk to you more about those three policies. And in light of the allotment, the reason we need to move them more quickly, and thus the waiving one of the readings. So I'll let
Right.
Nick, or you're going to go.
And I apologize. Richard, did you have other comments that you wanted to add there? I do apologize if I didn't.
No, I was just here in case there are questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm happy to take questions on the policy changes, go over them individually, one by one. But I did want to share some feedback we've received from the institutions that aren't captured in your red line version. In 608.2, there was some, I think, confusion after the changes as to whether this policy applied to a different scope of employees. It continues to only apply to those excluded from the broadbanding system and who are not academic staff. But to make that clearer, our recommendation is to take items 5 and 6 of the current version, combine those two together, and make it the new subsection 1 of 608.2. So that then will make it very clear who this policy applies to. So I don't know if there are questions or if going through this individually is more helpful.
We're on policy 608.2 and the red line version, and what Mr. Vaughn is doing is just trying to explain the changes that are being done, which are done mostly for clarity of
Yes.
this policy.
Yes.
They're not substantive types of changes, is that right?
That's true with the combination that I just mentioned that isn't captured in your red line version. That is not a substantive change. The one substantive change in 608.2 is the deletion of subsection 7, which deals with a notice requirement for those excluded from the broadbanding system who were hired before September 26, 2012, who received a month's notice, or I'm sorry, a year's notice. That has been deleted based on feedback that we've received from the campuses.
Good. I like to see that we're responsive to those requests. Thank you. Any questions on 608.2? All right, Mr. Vaughn, could you move on to number 703.1?
703.1, there are no substantive changes. As you can see, some of them are just, I think over the years, when changes have been made to the policy, it hasn't been fully updated. So, for example, 2 definitions in which the terms are not included in the policy have been taken out, as well as reference to retirement plans. Those are taken out because early retirement payments do not include employer contributions to retirement plans. So there's no substantive changes, except edits.
Are there any comments or questions on this? Dr. Murphy?
I have a question, because last year there was a big issue. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've got the camera. I've got the limited view seat here. Last year there was a huge issue that we had a compensation committee meeting over to go through this on the early retirements. And there was some confusion with regards to, you generally start at 50%, and certain benefits occur at the 50% mark that don't occur at, say, the 30% mark, right? As somebody steps down in their amount of time that they're devoting to the institution. So my question is that all captured in this? Because I read through it and I just flat couldn't remember if it was health insurance or if it was TIA-CREF contributions. And I raise that because you just noted that the TIA-CREF contributions wouldn't continue to occur. So could you give some clarity on that issue when somebody's at the 50% mark, which is the highest percentage that you can be on that phase retirement?
I'll step in for this one. I think the crucial cutoff that you're referring to, Dr. Murphy, is for eligibility for health insurance under the group insurance program that the university system has, and that requires 50% time for eligibility. Retirement is a separate consideration, and this policy prevents contributions to retirement plans in accordance with early retirement agreements. But I think the threshold you're referring to is for insurance purposes.
Thank you for the clarity, because I remember it was a big issue, cost a lot of time and a lot of
Angst.
gnashing of teeth by faculty.
All right, well, thank you. The clarity
you.
really, you bet. The comments we appreciate, and clarity does help. And once again, I'll thank our legal team, both Nick and Noah. Obviously, we rely on you heavily. Thank you. And Richard. Any other comments or questions on 703.1? Let's move on to policy 707, severance pay.
The change to 707, again, is not substantive. It is just clarifying that in addition to severance, under state statute, institutions and the system office have the ability to offer financial incentives for an employee to retire or resign if the employee's departure will increase efficiencies or reduce expenses. It's not just limited to instances of severance, and we just wanted to make that clearer based on feedback from the institutions.
So once again, clarity into the policy.
Yep.
Any questions on that? Comments? Hearing none, I think what I'd like to do is do these items 32, 33, 34 as consent, and I'd like a motion for approval of the first reading of these 3 policies. All in one? But do I do that all in one motion? Can we do that all in one motion?
You can, yes. You can take them in turn, or you can do it all as one.
Then we'll do this all as one. Could you just give us one more reason? Why are we asking to waive the second reading, which is obviously a time issue? But can you explain that? for
Yes,
us?
because under board policy, generally, you would have, as you have later in the agenda, other policies for second reading that you've considered at the prior board meeting. This just moves it along so it doesn't have to be pushed to the next agenda.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
what would be the reason for moving it so quickly if these are not substantive changes? How would that affect anything that the campuses need to adopt the 4.05 cuts to?
Yeah, Lisa, could you answer this,
Yes,
address
it's
this?
because our allotment plans are due to OMB by the 17th, and the campuses need to be able to start planning right now based on the changes to these policies.
And there was one substantive change. You want to reiterate that one again, the
Madam
substantive
Chair,
change?
I'm just going to really rely on Emma and Eric at this point in time. They're both employees of the system that.
I mean, I think, Nick, one strategy to reduce a budget would be for some faculty or staff, and I'll let Emma just talk about staff, but to be offered perhaps early retirement or phased retirement. And I think cleaning these policies up now allows that to occur for the presidents immediately, rather than waiting. And so there may be some faculty who will want to do that, and if, somebody wants to go to, let's say, a 50% retirement, they're at 100,000, that's 50,000, all of a sudden the president found that he can devote into that plus benefits. So I think it's a prudent to move them forward quickly. But I'll let my colleague on the staff side comment as well, if she so chooses.
I think that the one thing that I've learned through reading and rereading and looking at this and asking for advice from colleagues is that the individuals that are impacted by the dismissal policy and the lack of one-year notice that was referenced would be our senior staff. So they're going to be our vice presidents, our provosts, our deans, and members at that level, which unfortunately, because of how senates are structured, they're working with administration, and the goal of our staff senates is to be the voice of staff to facilitate that conversation. So those individuals would not be under the purview of my senates. But the one thing that I will say from an employee perspective is that you are reducing the right or the privilege of one of our senior staff members on February 3rd with the potential for notice of termination within the next 2 weeks. And that's just a very aggressive strategy, and that would be my one note.
Chancellor?
You're right, it is, but, they are senior leaders. They're paid very well. They're executives. We're protecting the lower pay scales, and I believe the history is we're going back to what we really were for decades, as I recall, and I don't know if the attorney can enlighten me. How long is the policy we have, the full year-long thing? I think that was only in the last couple of years that was enacted.
I think the last change in looking at this, and I don't know, maybe Noah has, I think, a little more institutional knowledge than I do, but I think the last change on that was 2001? No. 2012 was the last change that
So
was
we
made.
had, I hate to say it, maybe a little bit of generous protections to senior executives during the oil boom, and we're getting it back to where it was.
And falls more in line with
Right, to give a full
business.
year, yeah, it's, and again, the presidents, this was a cabinet thing, the presidents were all on board, this is all collaborative. I hope people are seeing my style as we want to get the facts on the table and get the census of the leaders who are now tasked to, put some pretty, big decisions in place, so. Feel free, any presidents who want to speak up if they have comments.
This is important. We need to understand the ramifications of this. You're right, Mr. Hager.
Madam Chair, there's one thing I learned in my legislative time was to watch for unintended consequences, and the only way you do that is by having a full discussion of exactly what the policy change is going to do and why it's needed. So thank you for taking a few minutes to really talk about it, and I am going to support the changes. I think they're needed and important, but I also think it's important that we have open dialogue.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughn, are there any other words that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think you all have covered it quite well.
All righty. Then we'll ask for a motion to approve the first readings, policy 608.2, 703.1, 707, and waive the second reading,
And accept the policies as amended.
and accept the policies as amended. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Melikers.
Second.
Second. Mr. Ness? Thank you. Mr. Ness? Christie?
Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Mr. Morton? Dr. Meliker?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. All right, well, moving on our agenda to items under Board Policy second readings. These are items 35, 36, 37, and 38. I'll call on Lisa. Do you have any input on these? If I understand right, perhaps you could help with items 35 and 36?
Yes. On 35, that one, there have been no changes since the first reading. It was just to align with the Affordable Care Act and to align with Century Code. And on item 36, HR 5, the pay policy, we did add, at Dr. Meliker's suggestion, the piece, let's see, on the back page of it on 5.13.1, for the recommendation to reduce expenditures will be submitted to not only the university's appropriate, or the campus's appropriate official, but also the compliance officer. And that was what Dr. Meliker requested at our last meeting. And that went back through the admin affairs, and they approved. So that would be the only change from the last time.
So for our second reading on HR 2, HR 5, are there any questions?
Sure, Madam Chair. I apologize, guys. I think this is kind of important stuff, but
very
this
important.
is, the way I'm reading this is an employee that makes some recommendation to the appropriate campus official, that campus official then needs to turn to the NDUS compliance officer to get approval of that, and we're expected to move quickly in the next 2 weeks?
No, what that is when they submit that recommendation for improvements, it goes at the same time to both.
Lisa, can I just ask, why does it need to go to the compliance officer?
Because they're to be assured that it's being reviewed.
What's being reviewed?
Their recommendation for to reduce expenditures or find deficiencies or whatnot.
The employee is being paid for the suggestion if we follow through with that. And what we were trying to do was to have another set of eyes, if nothing else, just taking a look at that to make sure that that was thought through and that was administered properly. And it was, that way it would be moved, not entirely away from the university, but it would be an additional set of eyes to the university.
Can you briefly just walk us through an example of how, of what this situation is?
I'm
An employee
actually trying to
brings-
find it here. 613.1 talks about an employee may submit a recommendation or proposal to reduce expenditures, okay, within, or the employee's work area with the appropriate campus official and the NDUS compliance officer. So all recommendations and proposals are presented by the eligible employee to be forwarded to the state suggestion incentive committee. And the president shall make the final decision on acceptance or rejection of the recommendations or the proposal. But it just allows a second set of eyes looking at what has been recommended by that employee to try to save, actually to try to save money.
I completely understand the purpose of
Yeah.
the process. I'm just wondering what the compliance officer is even going to do with the information. We have $40 million to cut. And some of these cuts may come in $25,000 increments or suggestions, and I'm just trying to understand what the purpose of the compliance officer is. I trust our institutions to find this money. And secondly, even if they get a recommendation, what are they going to do about it? I'm not.
I think the key part about this program is that if I, as an employee, have a cost savings idea, such as instead of putting tile in the atrium here, we're gonna put removable carpet squares, and I have a great vendor, and we found that cost savings netted from that kind of a process, that the employee could get an incentive from that. Lisa, is that?
Yes,
We're talking about
An
goods
employee.
and purchases type of things.
It could be anything, it could be procedural or anything,
right.
but anything that saves money. But my problem is it's vetted at the level of the state to begin with, right? So there's a state office specifically for this that then makes the recommendations to the president. And then on top of that, only if savings are realized, if it's implemented and savings are realized, does the individual receive anything. And it's 10% of the savings or up to $1,000. So if you think about it, if you come up with an idea that saves $150,000, you get $1,000. The institution saved $150,000. They're plus $149,000 for some employee being very perhaps entrepreneurial and very interested in their job and interested in the system. So I don't understand why we have to vet it through a compliance officer either, but I don't think this is something to die on the sword, but I don't think it's needed, because I think the state suggested incentive committees doing that, and then on top of that, only if savings are realized is anything given to the employee.
May I just ask, does this then bring a centrally location for all of these requests from the different colleges and universities, and then have a method to verify the payment back to the employee and tracking? Wouldn't it help facilitate that by having the compliance involved?
Well, I think it might. I'm not sure. It does, if we look at the program on state government side, yes, there's a central collecting area, and then it's referred back to the agency for, to verify the efficiency. In this case, I mean, I think some of the concerns that were brought forward were the efficiencies actually getting seen and moved forward. So that's why the compliance officer piece was added.
I think that's a valid reason. Chancellor?
Yes, the other reason I thought it was valuable was we have something like this in the Navy, and some ships implement it. It's a learning tool. Think of it like a mini cloud, like, hey, here's some new ideas. They save money at Lake Region. Now the central office can, again, this is aspirational. If it doesn't work, we can always change it again later. But people took the time to think this would be helpful. The questions are all, highly relevant. I mean, if there's, not support for it, of course, we're not going to fall on our sword, as someone said over this, but I think it was a mechanism to learn lessons and get that accelerated. But if it proves otherwise?
Well, I don't see it as a stumbling block to the process, so it may be, Dr. Melliker, you've given thought to this. It may be, as Chancellor says, a gathering point to coordinate.
I think it's worth a try, especially with our new compliance officer in place, and with they actually providing, like I said earlier, a second set of eyes or a second brain or a second look at some of these things. And so I think it's very worthwhile to go through it. Is it going to solve our shortfall, our 4.05 reduction that we need? No. But is it going to help with maybe some of the smaller issues in our system? It certainly could.
Any other comments? Mr. Hacker?
I apologize, Madam Chair, but the way I'm reading this, proposal goes to campus official, NDUS compliance officer. There's no clarity on who then sends the proposal to the state suggestion incentive committee. Does it take both of them? Do they send it individually? Does it come from the president? I guess I'm trying to work through this
The
in my mind of
process?
how is this going to work? And does it now take both of them to agree and digest, if you will, the suggestion to then send it to the state suggestion incentive committee, and then they turn around and they review it, and then they make a recommendation of the proposal, and then they forward it to the institutional president, probably reward the employee at that point in time? It just feels like there's a lot of steps in here, and I'm trying to understand, how is that flow going to work?
I think,
Lisa?
Madam Chair, I think that that can be worked out through procedures. This is a policy. The compliance officer, together with the campuses and the chancellor, can work through procedures to figure that out. I don't think that that's something that we have to do here.
Thank you.
And Madam Chairman?
Yes, Chancellor?
Totally agree with my chief of staff, but if it's causing some angst for the board, again, we're not going to fall on our sword for it.
Right, I understand that.
I think we can work out the details, but we certainly don't want to, if there's a discomfort with it, we can come back. Would you agree, Lisa? We can come back in a month if we want to fill out more of the procedures? Is that what you prefer, Member Hacker, or come back with some of the procedures?
Well, I think we definitely need the bottom part of this policy change, though.
Okay, I'm just saying we can come back in a month.
And I like the idea of having a centralized location where people can access kind of a SharePoint of, hey, we found savings in this, or we found savings in that. And so I completely agree. What I just don't want to do is adopt policies that create roadblocks because of an administration policy change, that all of a sudden now we have 2 extra stops along the way. I guess that's my concern. I'll support the policy change, but if there's stumbling blocks, I hope we would come back and make an additional revision.
There you
go. We can make an agenda item, come back and brief some of the procedures with the new compliance officer if you, okay?
Madam Chair, if there's problems, I assume that the system office will come back with a change. We don't need to add an agenda item.
I agree, and I think that would be brought to us very quickly. I agree. All righty, thank you. Appreciate the discussion on that. Perhaps we'll just continue moving along the discussion on these policies. Second reading, Policy 820.
Let's do a motion on those 3, right?
We already did, we did those. Okay, we just reviewed and discussed items 35 and 36, which are the 2 HR policies. We're now on item number 37, is that correct? Policy number 820. Do we have Laura Ann on the phone to discuss, or Lisa, did you want to assist us?
I can't.
You cannot, okay.
She's on.
She is on the phone. Laura Ann, we're on Policy 820. Could you share and give us some insight on the changes on this? This is second reading.
Yes, Madam Chair and members of the committee. After first reading, I did go back to CCF and the state staff Senate for additional input. And at that time, and subsequent to that, we've suggested one small wording change. It is under number 3A, definitions, number 6. The definition of a dependent, we have changed that and deleted the wording, must be legally married as recognized by the state of North Dakota. So the new dependent definition reads, eligible dependents are defined as, number 1, the spouse of the employee, number 2, a child who is related to the employee as a natural child, a child placed for adoption, a legally adopted child, a child for whom the employee has legal guardianship, a stepchild or a foster child under the age of 26. Eligible dependents do not include the spouse of an adult dependent child. So again, the only change was to remove the wording, must be legally married as recognized by the state of North Dakota, and that is to be in compliance with, or consistent with, the NDPERS definition and the Supreme Court ruling earlier. That is the only change.
Thank you, Ms. Schott. Any comments or questions on this policy, second reading? Mr. Murphy?
So that was the only issue that CCF found with the policy. Everything else they found was perfectly fine.
Okay.
And so I would urge the approval of the
Thank you.
policy. Thank you.
Appreciate your input there. Any other comments or questions on this? Now, just so I understand, is this a change to the second reading? This is. So this is an amended second reading, and we can make that change and still approve it? As amended. All right, thank you. Let's move on to policy 402.11, test of high school equivalency. Richard, can you assist us with this?
Yes, this is a very simple policy addition. We have a policy that allows a GED or high school equivalency test administered in North Dakota to be used for admission. In the past, that had been sufficient. We are now finding that we have people with GEDs from other states seeking admission. And of course, we didn't intend to bar them. It just hadn't come up before. This allows them to also be admitted with that test.
Thank you. Once again, this is the second reading of this policy. Are there any questions or discussion on policy 402.11? Hearing none. All right, then we will look to approve board policy second reading, items number 35, 36, 37, and 38. Do we have a motion to approve the second reading of these policies? Mr. Meliker, thank you. Second?
Second.
Mr. Ness, thank you. Christie?
Mr. Morton? Yes. Mr. Hacker?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Steeman?
Yes.
Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Ms. Reichert? Dr. Meliker? Board Chair Nesset?
Yes. Thank you. I mean, this really is the heart of the work that we do, and I think the discussion is very valuable. Assessment of meeting and potential future agenda items. Good meeting. I think this has been, I think the time this morning, the first half of the meeting with the interim committee members was just invaluable to me. I really enjoyed that. Chancellor Hagarat?
And just, as I mentioned earlier, people have had a chance to think on the process I proposed about the budget guidelines. Again, we've been very collaborative. We've met with Tammy's committee, all the presidents. We sent out guidelines to you all about 4 weeks ago, went back, incorporated input, but then the world changed a little bit on Monday and went from 2.5 to 4. Tammy's already met again, and some campuses are leaning very far forward, talking about, significantly rethinking how they approach the pay raises for the coming year. And we're thinking this could be something as a system that we re-engage in and think about maybe some caps or some bands, make sure that it's shared more at the top, less on the bottom, or, within limits. So I propose that we work with a committee and then the Chancellor's Cabinet and come back with a special meeting, maybe about phone, or if people want to talk about it now, if they want to be more involved, or authorize the Chancellor and the Chancellor's Cabinet to just, proceed with the new guidelines for the presidents.
The one thing I'd like to add to this and share is that, it is board policy, once again, to handle the salaries of the presidents and the chancellor. So as we discuss how much input the board will have in this process, I personally think that the board should be involved in, at least at the highest level of the presidents, if we are talking any sort of salary caps or any changes whatsoever, because that is originally responsibility of the board. So I personally would like to see that remain within board discussion rather than delegating that to the chancellor and staff. That's my comments.
Madam Chair, is there any way that we can continue along the path that we are on right now and maybe shorten up the timeline a little bit if necessary and allow the colleges and universities to come back to us or to however that, probably Dr. Hager, with their recommendations? That North Dakota State University announced a good chunk of theirs yesterday or the day before. And I think we might be surprised to see what innovative ways might come out of that discussion versus automatically capping salaries and doing that type of thing. That's difficult on employees, it's difficult on morale, it's difficult on lots of things, and I think we might find some other ways that that can be solved.
Good point. And I think those things, can be handled with the chancellor and with your committee. However, when it comes to campus presidents, I would like to see the board involved in that discussion. That's all I'm saying. Any other thoughts on this? So we can give direction to the chancellor as we move quickly in these next few weeks with these.
And again, I'm kind of laying out how I was approaching it. Again, surprise happened on Monday, so normally this would take weeks or months to go through. But we've been seeing some of the various proposals from the different campuses, and some, are being fairly, innovative, like you're saying. And just so I understand it, there's maximum latitude to presidents to handle their issues within some guidelines which we shared before. Now it's just the issue of the equity of employees of the state of North Dakota in different campuses, if there's some benefit of some band or range so that there isn't such a disparity. That some campuses there's no pay raises for anybody, and some there's maximum, and that's what I'm saying. It's a question to talk about within the board or within the chancellor's cabinet and my authority. So it's really a question of how much you want to be involved. Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
My question would be, generally, the state board takes their nod to what the salary increase should look like based on what the legislature approves for state employees. Is that something that the governor has addressed in the allotment process as to what, if we're being held to a standard that we would have a similar type raise as other state agencies, or is everyone being given latitude to deal with it as they need to?
Could I? Tammy, feel free to jump in, but I think he's given the latitude to the different agencies to run these systems the way they are. Yeah, so it's up to yeah. Yeah. And that's why I'm coming to you. We have a latitude, and it's really, it's kind of gets to these deeper issues we were talking about in May, that as a system, we want innovation, we want adaptability, we want to respond to different market conditions. This is part of the tuition debate, right? The markets are very different from Minot to Wahpeton. Just, and there was a time where there was going to be like this cookie cutter put everything. So we want latitude, market responsiveness, but are there bands we want to talk about that we want all the upper tier, let's say all the upper tier management, all the campuses to give a little bit. Maybe that's the policy, that all the upper tier take a little less of a raise, the lower tier does more. That's a question. Or in talking with the presidents, no, each president do what you want, give the max salary increases across the board because you're doing better, And again, it's kind of a value statement and how much we do as a system. And I'm not hard over one way but other, but I've just seen enough drafts from the different campuses that some presidents are leaning very far forward and thinking about no pay raises for anybody in the senior management, period. Others, not so. So that's why I'm asking you all for your advice and guidance.
I guess that my comment is first of all, I would trust our institutional presidents to kind of address this initially, how they want to do it. Secondly, I would agree with Kathy on her suggestion with the salaries of our highest ranking officials, if that's the proper terminology. So that's all I would say is
Thank you.
Give our presidents the latitude to deal with this initially, and is it February 17th when those suggestions are due? And then also with the president's salaries being set by them.
If I could clarify my thinking a little bit. Again, I'm evolving on this because it's moving fast, but I'm thinking of a scenario where a senior vice president gets the full 3%. Meanwhile, the janitor help teaching a welding class gets no pay raise because he's in a college that gets less. I'm just saying, as the values of North Dakota, is that meet the fairness thing? And I think it's within my guidelines as a chancellor to say, bias it toward the upper end across the board as leaders and protect the people at the lower end. That's the question. It's easier for me to just give every campus complete latitude, right? I can then just back away and take no heat. But as an old ship captain who's been grilled many times, I think I have some responsibility to say, we are running a system, but again, I'm coming to you all, and I'm shedding this on you at all. I'm willing to take this on with the presidents and talk about it, but I want to be sure to talk to you first. And I understand that Chair Nessett's view is, of course, the presidents and above, and maybe I'd have to look at presidents, and ask them what they think, but, certainly I'm not trying to infringe on your ability to set salaries for presidents, but,
Well, I'd like to reserve that, as we've already discussed. And yes, Mr. Murphy?
Well, I would just
Dr.
say,
Murphy.
well, that's okay. The bottom line, I think, is if you want every institution, if there's going to be constraints on pay, leadership has to lead. And at another institution with a budget much, much larger, there was a similar issue during one of the recessions in the late 80s, early 90s. And they literally were asking secretaries to take 20 or 30% pay cuts, but yet the vice presidents weren't. And finally, what ended up happening was all the upper level administration took big pay cuts and nobody else did. And that's called leadership. And I think as we look at this crisis, we can depend upon our presidents to be creative and fair across the board with their staff, because they understand how hard it is to recruit good staff, recruit good faculty, and they don't want to lose people. And so I think we can rest assured that our leadership will lead. And if they don't lead, I'm sure they'll hear about it.
Well said. I think with that, we have some pretty clear direction. Ms. Reichert?
Just one comment. I think that if we were to suggest that adjustments be weighted in a particular direction, that would be contrary to our policy as we've stated it, which is that everyone's in a pay grade, and that pay grade is tied to a range. And depending on where you're at in the range, so arguably if someone could be at the executive level, a senior level, and be very low in their pay range, and at not a competitive wage, whereas you could have someone at one of the lower grades who's at the top of their pay range, probably shouldn't get an increase, right? Because the market doesn't warrant that. So I think if our policy, if our system is what it is, our compensation system is, and it's geared that particular way, I think this would risk the integrity of that system by saying it doesn't matter where you're at in your range, we're going to throw market out the window and just say anyone in this pay grade or above is frozen. So,
Thank you. Appreciate that. Chancellor, do you have the direction? Do you feel you have the heart of the board here as far as direction? Any other comments? Hearing none?
Madam Chair, this is separate from that discussion.
Yes, Mr. Hacker?
Just for the agenda, next time, I think it would be interesting to get an update from UND. They instituted a type of know before you owe, where they've advised all of their students based on the amount of debt. And debt was something we talked about this morning. They're advising their students that, by not taking more credits and graduating on time, you're going to end up with this amount of debt, and it's going to cost you this much. And I've heard some rumblings that it's been pretty successful. And so at the next meeting, I would just request that we get an update on the progress of that initiative.
Good point. Any other items under future agenda? Hearing none, we're now open to public comment. If there's anyone who would like to step forward and share anything with the board. Pardon me? Oh, Emma, excuse me.
On behalf of State Staff Senate, I wanted to make an announcement. We had our elections in January for the staff advisor to the state board, and my colleague from Lake Region State College, Andy Wakeford, will be joining you starting July 1. So we look forward to seeing him move into the position, as he's been instrumental on his campus dealing with staff advisory and Senate issues, and been an integral part of our State Staff Senate.
Stephanie, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And you will be with us until then. You will. Well, we enjoy your input here. Chancellor?
I just wanted to correct omission. I see Jerry Rosted is out there, Bakken, a director. I didn't see you before, but I want to thank him for all the work he did, and the scholarship board, including several members, and of course Richard, who had some initial ideas on how to make this all happen. So I didn't acknowledge him. So.
All righty, thank you. Future board meeting, March 15th, 2016 at the University of North Dakota. And with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you.